right, we'll get started, everyone. Thank you for being here on this very cold and snowy night. If we can get a roll call, please. Hernandez.
Here.
Cohen.
Here.
Mendoza. Here. Halpern.
Here.
Tanya Moody.
Here.
Partha. Here. Joey, if you can do the...
I move that the Board of Education approve the amended meeting agenda as presented.
And before we vote on that, can we get a second, I guess?
A second.
I just want to note that we do have on our agenda originally on here that we were going to do a building safety update, which is actually something we were supposed to do in our last meeting and which went long, and so we kicked it to this meeting. Again, in recognition that the weather is not so great and we want people to make it home safely and timely, we're going to move that important discussion to another time when we can give it its full and appropriate due and not worry about trying to get home in traffic. So that is the amendment that we're making to the agenda. So can we vote? Hernandez?
Yes.
Cohen?
Yes.
Mendoza?
Yes.
Halpern?
Yes.
Tanya Moody?
Yes.
Partha? Yes. And then we can do
Yes, we will.
and all that.
Thank you.
Please.
Thank you very much. Good evening, everyone. Thank you so much for coming out on a snowy evening. Appreciate being here. Let me start off with some comments about weather. And, we are obviously in the rough and tumble winter season, and we wanted to remind our parents and caregivers about how we make decisions on school closures. Our primary goal is to keep school open. And we hear from many parents and from caregivers around both Evanston and Skokie about the importance of keeping school open. Yet when a weather situation occurs, we look at several factors. The actual temperature outside, the overall accumulation of snow, the operation of our buildings, and these are questions about whether or not the heat is running, is the water running, and general conditions on roadways throughout the day. We know that this morning was a tough morning, but we also know, and we were watching the weather and the radar early into the morning, somewhere around 3 less this morning, on where the storm was going and what we were doing. When weather is approaching, we deploy our maintenance team, and I want to take a moment and thank them personally, professionally. Our guys and gals were out at 3 a.m. And again, I always welcome critique, and so we've gotten some important push from community members around lots and walks not being shoveled. Lots and walks were shoveled starting at 3. We don't have an extensive fleet of plows, and so we go from one lot to another lot to another lot, back to a lot, go back. So, but our team was out there under Don Stevenson's leadership, Tom Sabin, and Rafael Obafemi, who's here. But I just want to thank each and every one of our guys and gals who are behind a snowblower, who are behind the shovels, who are laying down salt. It's a hard job, and they were out there at 3 a.m. this morning. And we will continue to be out there. And again, we recognize and respect the concern raised by many about ICC walkways and about the parking lots, and we are doing everything that we can to provide salt and man and woman power to actually clear our walkways and our parking lots. We do have a close eye on Wednesday and Thursday. School will be open tomorrow, Tuesday. I'll repeat that. School will be open tomorrow, Tuesday. We have a close eye out on Wednesday and Thursday of this week, where temperatures are going to be quite cold. If we're going to close schools, we'll assess that situation into the evening tonight, and I will have a decision out as soon as I can tomorrow morning. And we will get that information out through our typical means of sending out a note via email. We'll post it on the website, and then we will obviously contact the emergency a group that does the strand of closures when you watch Channel 7 or Channel 9 News, Channel 5, Channel 2. And we will try to get to phone calls at some point during the day with our electronic phone calls. So expect a message from us sometime tomorrow morning on where we will be on Wednesday and Thursday. A couple things I want to share, and I want to start, and Adil, I'll cue you in a second. On Saturday, this past weekend, there were several fantastic activities, but let me go to the evening activity. On Saturday, many of us attended the YMCA Gala, where our own Jim McCollin received the first annual Lorraine Morton Award for Community Service given by the YMCA. It was a lovely evening, a fantastic celebration, and a fantastic celebration of the service of Mayor Morton, who we love Mayor Morton as the educator that she was, and then the politician, the mayor that she was, and we love Jim McCollin, who's done some fabulous work over the years at Chute Middle School. There was a fabulous video that celebrates Jim's accomplishments, and if our technology works on a cold night, we're going to play it.
Mayor Morton's such a special person for all of us who are Evanstonians, for her deep dedication into the fabric of our city. And that dedication started in District 65. If you were lucky enough, as I was, to engage with Mayor Morton one-on-one, the conversation would always be about what's most important for the children in Evanston, what's most important for Evanston, and how we move forward together as a community. It's the same conversation that I had with Jim day in, day out.
And so Mac has the same passion, the same drive, the same excellence that Mr. Morgan, but also he has compassion. And compassion is understanding that everyone's not the same. One size doesn't fit all, and so you may have to do some creative stuff to make things happen.
So when you think about the true nature of public service and of being a servant leader for a community to make a difference in the lives of the people you serve, Mayor Morton stands on top of that podium in Jim's standing right next to him.
Pretty much everything that's happened is his fault in terms of all of this.
You know, Jimmy, you were just a great guy from the day you came into the gym. You did whatever was asked to do, and you did it at a high level. And no one would have ever known you were not a student teacher. They thought you were a teacher. With 20 years of experience in it.
They gave me the whole gym to run, so it was good.
I don't know how to say it. He's just Mr. Mac. He's that type of guy who's helping everyone out.
Mr. Mac's been big is we're a family, and we truly feel like that when we're here.
And before every single day he says, what is it?
Walk in, have a great day. Let's go. Walk in, have a great day.
One thing he's taught me from day one when I stepped into this position is people have to come first.
He is able to connect with kids.
He sees the good in every student.
I enjoy watching a person that truly wakes up every morning and thinks about each of our students, and then when he goes home, it's still on his mind.
I think he actually genuinely cares about us.
He walks into classrooms and asks, what are you learning right now? That is something I haven't heard other teachers talk about their principals doing.
After school every day, he drives around and checks that everybody's coming home safely.
When sixth graders come into the building, the very first day, parents are nervous. He turns to the parents and says, take out your cell phone. Here's my phone number. You can call me anytime you need to.
It's just things like that. He goes above and beyond and does things he doesn't have to do that he's not required to do for the students.
I think in honoring Jim, it's important that if he were sitting here next to me, he would absolutely say, this isn't about McCollin. This is about the Chute family. This is about the children that we serve. This is about Evanston. This is about District 65.
I think he understands this community in a way that is so deeply personal that it's not just a responsibility for him to keep us lifted and to keep us going, but it's just become the fabric of who he is.
He's still that mentor. He definitely shows his human side. His allergies tend to kick up from time to time.
Each decision that I contemplated and said, well, what would Mr. Mac do? He's very genuine, and he is going to give you the good and the bad. but is always going to be there to support you through both. And I think he really helps me want to be a better teacher and to reach every kid and see them in the most positive light possible.
My children and the children who attended shoot will remember Jim for the rest of their lives.
He's a father figure to me because I never had a father, so
I would tell him that I really respect him and how he does his job.
From my heart to the rest of my family's heart, I want to tell Mr. Mack, you know, you are a part of my family.
I think he's the best principal ever. I wouldn't want any other principal than Mr. Mack. Honestly, he's a role model of me. I used to never like school, but now sometimes I feel like I could be a principal someday.
I couldn't be more appreciative. I couldn't be more appreciative for how he stands tall for what's most important, which is making a difference in the lives of our kids. So I thank you, Jim, for that.
Thank you, Mr. Mack.
Shoot students always responsible, respectful, and taking the shoot road to be successful. Have a wonderful day.
Thank you, Mr. Mack. And on behalf of the district, to salute Mr. McCollin, Jim McCollin, and really the whole Shoot family. It was just a very special moment, and we appreciate the honor of a great educator and by the YMCA as we move forward. A couple other things. I had the opportunity on Saturday to attend the parent-run seminar at Dewey on how to talk to your students about race. And I would estimate that close to 100 people showed up and participated on an engaging conversation that embraces our equity agenda. I want to congratulate the organizers and the participants for coming out on an especially cold day. I also attended, and several of us did here, the Officer and Gentleman Academy kickoff on Saturday. OGA is a student mentoring program that started as a partnership between Principal Adrian Harries from Nichols and Brian Harris, who's on our staff here at the central office, and Officer Adam Howard at the Evanston Police Department. The Evanston Police Department has embraced this partnership, focusing on mentoring and building relationships with African American males in partnership with the district, the city, and the Evanston Fire Department. I salute the officers engaged in this program. And then finally, I want to express my deep appreciation to the citizens who came to our last board meeting to offer perspectives and voice on their children and their children's experiences when they are parts of racial slurs in our schools, in our parks, across our community, in our community centers. I found the meeting to be both heartfelt and moving, and something that's really important for us to keep going on. As a follow-through, we are convening 2 solutions-oriented restorative circles open to all, and that will occur on February 6th from 6 to 8 p.m. at Fleetwood Jourdain, and on February 27th from 6 to 8 p.m. at the Beth Emmet Synagogue, and there'll be more information coming out. And my final note, I want to finally salute our colleagues in the District Educators Council, the Teachers Union, who have proactively and enthusiastically embraced and engaged in planning work on how we'll move forward during the Black Lives Matter week coming up in February. And I would just want to thank DEC for taking this leadership role. We're working closely together, and it's an honor to work together to really inform what will be an exciting part of our efforts on our equity agenda and our efforts during Black History Month. And with that, I'm done.
Do we have any board comments? Well, then I would also like to take this opportunity to say that I am so very pleased at the announcement that District 65 is participating in the Black Lives Matter at School National Week of Action next week to kick off Black History Month. Black History Month is an affirmation of the achievements of citizens from the African diaspora. It is a celebration of the critical role of Black Americans in U.S. history and in current world events. Black Lives Matter at School National Week of Action is also an affirmation and a reminder. an affirmation that Black students, families, and teachers are important and loved members of our schools and our community, and a reminder that systemic barriers and cultural biases continue to impede our vision of true equity. The district's participation in the Black Lives Matter National Week of Action would not be happening without the leadership and action of our DEC colleagues. I offer my sincere thanks and applause to DEC leadership for unanimously voting to participate in Black Lives Matter Week and for coming to our administration to collaborate on a plan for making that week a success. This is an important and concrete example of how the district's equity work and trainings are being translated into change in the classroom. To be sure, celebrating Black lives and achievements for 1 week or 1 month is not sufficient. But the affirmative choice to participate in this movement is a significant step in the right direction. And with our educators, we will continue to work towards creating a curriculum that integrates the history and achievements of people of color into our students' education year-round. So thank you.
We will move on to the
high five
recognition. And tonight we have the honor of having one of our high five recipients here. This year we're celebrating our second cohort of employees for their tremendous work and their continued dedication to their students, their colleagues, and to District 65 families. Last school year, we launched the High Five program with the goal of publicly acknowledging the incredibly dedicated members of our team and to engage our community in the important work happening throughout our school district every single day. We are grateful to the First Bank and Trust, together with Byline Bank, for their continued support of the High Five program. Through their sponsorship, each of our recipients will receive a $75 gift card, a frame recognition certificate, and an invite to a celebratory luncheon for all of our year's recipients to be held in May when it's a lot warmer and more pleasant outside. This evening, we have one special person to recognize, and I'd like to invite Ms. Payne and Carrie Mendez up to the podium as I carry on the presentation. We are recognizing Brenda Payne for her tireless efforts and always putting the students of Dr. Bessie Rhodes School of Global Studies first. She is our first district health clerk to be recognized as part of our High Five program. Ms. Payne was nominated by one of our parents at Bessie Rhodes, who unfortunately could not be with us this evening. However, I'd like to share some of the remarks from her nomination.
Don't make me cry.
Okay, I won't make you cry.
No promises.
Yes, ma'am. And this is quote, "Words can't describe how wonderful Miss Payne is with the kids at Bessie Rhodes. She is caring and always so helpful. My daughter has sickle cell, and Miss Payne is always there to help her through her pain, whether it's calling her down from class to give her medication or going up to my daughter's class to check on her to make sure that she is keeping hydrated throughout the day. She encourages my daughter daily and reminds her that she is not alone and can always come to talk to her if she isn't feeling well. These types of things, as a mother, gives me ease throughout the day as I know my daughter is in great hands and there is someone there from 8 to 3 that is looking out for her. I know Ms. Payne treats all students with extra love and care as I've watched her at drop-off help get the younger kids to their classrooms and encourage the older kids to do the right things. Ms. Payne is a wonderful person, and the saying, "No child left behind," embodies her because she genuinely cares for all of the kids at Bessie Rhodes, and on a daily basis goes above and beyond to make not only the kids' day run smoothly, but give the parents a sense of ease to know that their kids are in great hands. I hope Ms. Payne will be heavily considered, which she was, and she's honored for this recognition, because I can't think of anyone who is more deserving of it. And on behalf of the school board and our administration and the loving parent and parents, and all of us who love you, Brenda, I want to offer great congratulations and thank Ms. Brenda Payne for her genuine care and commitment to the students and families of Bessie Rhodes. I don't know if either of you have any comments that you'd like to share, or?
I look at my administrator.
I just want to say she's the come up to the microphone.
I just second everything that that parent said. She's truly amazing, and we're really glad that she's with us. And she deserves this award.
I guess the only thing I want to say, no, I can talk about it.
But for the people at home, they need to
Okay.
hear you through the microphone. Thank you.
When I come to school every day at like 7 o'clock, and I'm not really supposed to be there till 7:45. But I know there's always activities going on. Kids are always getting hurt. Someone's not opening the door, so I try to be the safe person to watch when kids are coming up in the round, to be there to make sure somebody's greeting them at the door. I really appreciate Ms. Pottinger and all of you for this nomination, and I will continue to do the things that I do.
Excellent.
She was trying to get out of my picture, and I said, no, we gotta come in. Oh, wow. My good side up. Thank you.
Okay, so with that, we will move on to public comments. Members of the public are welcome and invited to address the board during open public meetings. And please remember when you come to the podium to state your name and that you'll have 3 minutes to speak. The Board of Education, the speakers are discouraged from using the public comment period to air specific concerns about district employees, being mindful that the public comment period is not a suitable forum for fact-finding or resolution of disputes. Rather, we strongly encourage members of the public who have concerns about specific district employees to follow district communication guidelines found in the student handbook. Our first set of speakers will be Kate Mason-Schultz and the Green Team. I think we're all going to come up together, or?
We can. Sorry. Good evening. My name is Kate Mason-Schultz. I am the nutrition coordinator for District 65, but I'm here tonight on behalf of our District Green teams. In January of 2017, I got an email from a parent at Willard. In her email, she asked me if I'd be willing to meet with her to discuss the possibility of switching from a styrofoam lunch tray to an option better for our environment. That parent was Marie Kabaya, who is here tonight, and one of the founding members of our current District Green team. I responded that I would love to speak with her and that I would begin some initial research. I also told her that becoming more green was one of my goals for the Nutrition Services Department. Since that initial email, I have learned so much about our environment, the impact that we have on it, and what efforts we can and should be making to protect it. I had always thought that I had a good understanding of sustainability, and further, that I was quite green myself. But the truth is, I know so little compared to this group of women that are about to share their thoughts and knowledge with you. I've come to understand that being green, putting thoughts behind our actions, and simply knowing the specific actions we make that will have an environmental impact is a mind shift and a lifestyle change. I urge you to listen carefully as this group describes their experiences working, and by working I mean volunteering, in our district, and the absolute passion they each have in helping us take important steps to align ourselves with the City of Evanston's goals and plans as laid out in the Climate Action and Resiliency Plan, or CARP, which you will hear more about. Whether we as a district are ready or not, the City of Evanston is moving forward with plans designed to assist in meeting future goals. Those plans require our participation. Why not get ahead of the game? My ask is for additional leadership to come forward and begin to support this process and these efforts in any way that they can. I oversee one department in this district, and it is difficult to implement changes that necessitate district-wide support and oversight from that position. However, we've accomplished a lot, and just imagine what we could do if we had true district-wide effort. I'd like to take this opportunity to further commit my time and efforts to our green teams. I will do whatever I can to support them and the district, but they know and I know we can't do this alone. As we hear more about sustainability, please also think about that word, sustainability, from a different frame of mind. What will happen when our current green team no longer has children in our district? What can we do now to ensure that their efforts are sustainable? I'd now like to introduce you to the founding members of our district green team, 5 amazing women who have all played important roles in implementing sustainability efforts in our district and have been doing so under the radar for many years. This is Becky Brodsky, a parent at Shoot.
If you want to just come up and when you start your comments, just please state your name.
Sorry, I cannot see with my glasses. My name is Becky Brodsky, and I have a daughter at Shoot.
Becky, can you put the mic? Can you pull the microphone closer to you?
And I have a son at ETHS, and he went through Bessie Rhodes. So I have been working on these efforts for green efforts for close to 11 years. And met these wonderful ladies a year and a half ago and started this journey with them. While we have all accomplished much at our individual schools, these efforts will only have lasting effects, as Kate said, if there is buy-in and support at the district level. We appreciate the district's openness to working with us in order to make sustainable changes this past year and a half after we informed them of the issues and requested that changes needed to be made. Kate has been an amazing asset and has been our closest collaborator. She's helped us implement some of the biggest initiatives and has been very open to learning about sustainability and has made it a priority in her work, as you just heard. Her collaborative attitude has allowed us to make some significant changes in a short amount of time. Kate sourced the compostable trays, helped negotiate their pricing, and coordinated district efforts to make composting the trays work logistically. She has worked on menu changes that have benefited the students in terms of nutrition, has worked to source foods with reduced packaging waste, and worked with us on grants for a waste station at Kingsley and bulk ketchup dispensers for all schools. Currently, we are working together to reduce food waste in the lunchrooms by creating protocols for food sharing tables in all the schools. Rafael Obafemi has provided financial support for the 6-school compost pilot and supports increasing the number of schools that participate every year and supported the switch to compostable trays as well as composting them. Don Stevenson of Buildings and Grounds has collaborated with Kate and myself to come up with a collection method and storage solution for the trays. And the curriculum department, they've been very open to collaborating with us and are interested in incorporating more environmental education into the curriculum. We're currently working with them on the 6th grade CARP challenge. And Melissa Messinger in communications worked with us to create a sustainability tab on the district website. And she and I worked together on the signage for the lunchroom waste station. So the district now has standardized signage to use in all the school lunchrooms. While these efforts are great progress, I know that, again, after almost 11 years of doing this work, this is not enough. The only way to create lasting change is to create an overarching sustainability plan that is spearheaded by strong leadership at the district level. We respectfully request that you consider all of our children's futures and the future of our planet and make sustainability a priority in District 65 now. Thank you.
Hi, my name is Marika Mia, and I have 2 kids at Willard. As a Hispanic parent, I attended last month's meeting on equity and racism and was troubled by the stories, but also encouraged by the sense of urgency and the desire to roll up its sleeves and do the important work ahead of the community. Along with other parents, I have been working with a very small number of supportive district staff for about 2 years now. On multiple occasions, the messaging we have received is that sustainability cannot be prioritized because the district is occupied with the important work of equity. In fact, equity is precisely why we have to be so concerned with the environment. Today, I'm here as a parent, but also as a physician with an interest in environmental health. When we study how health is impacted by the environment, it is clear that sustainability is important because of and not despite of equity concerns. The health effects of poor environmental practices are always felt more acutely by those who are most vulnerable. Rates of asthma, heart disease, and preterm labor, among others, are associated with increased air pollution. I'd need way more time than 3 minutes to really go into detail in terms of the effect of climate and health. But suffice it to say that these effects are not theoretical and are being seen in office visits and ER visits every day. By approving the Climate Action and Resiliency Plan, the city has acknowledged the urgent need for tangible actions, among them becoming zero waste by 2050. Unfortunately, in our schools, this work has been going on behind the scenes for the most part. While the composting pilot has been a great success for most of the schools involved, changing to LED light bulbs is literally invisible to most students. On a daily basis, the students do not observe leadership that is teaching by example to promote a culture that limits the consumption of resources. How is it possible that students don't hear about climate change until the 6th grade? How can these students then understand the link between their waste and their carbon footprint? There's no concerted effort to teach how their choices affect the health of the environment and, in turn, their own. How will these future Evanstonians be the ones to uphold CARP? District 65 counts with almost 13% of Evanston residents spending half their waking hours within its premises. If CARP is to succeed, the district must align with it not just in name, but in actions. In the healthcare sector, there's a big buzz surrounding climate change as a public health emergency. I was listening to an interview with former Surgeon General Dr. David Thatcher speaking about the need for urgency in the climate change discourse. Climate change, he stressed, does not affect everyone equally. Take a moment to think about who will be most impacted by the freezing extreme temperatures that we'll see in the next couple of days, and talk about equity. As a healthcare provider, I would be failing my patients if I did not use my voice outside of the exam room to talk about climate change. The district will be failing its students until it uses its power to educate about one of the greatest challenges of their time. Thank you.
Sylvia Wooler. I have kids at Washington. So last month we met with the PTA Council to provide an update to the progress made by some of the newly formed green teams around the district. We were impressed by what has been accomplished and struck by the excitement, energy, and passion in many of the grassroots initiatives emerging. However, we do not see the necessary action or commitment at the District 65 leadership level. Yes, composting pilot, compostable trays, and separated utensil packets have been rolled out, and that is wonderful. However, even with those implemented changes, there is not enough training, enforcement, or resolution of issues when they arise. More schools might be included in the pilot next school year, but without the district's control, authority, or commitment to long-term environmental goals, great projects like this may fail or fall back on the volunteer parents. Cost implications of the composting pilot, a wonderful achievement. There has been little change in landfill pickups. Even though 5 schools are composting and recycling rates are up, producing around 90% reduction in waste going to landfill, landfill pickups are still disproportionate at most schools. Recycling is free for D65, and these initiatives could save the district money even with composting costs, especially if staff and custodians were trained properly. One of last year's Green Team initiatives was a district-wide end-of-year supply collection with buildings and grounds. 8 schools participated. It was simple to implement. There was high interest in this program as well as the district-wide school supply purchase to reduce cost of buying new each year and keeping useful resources out of landfill, and to add to the COPE backpacks. However, there was a miscommunication and many of the items collected went missing until partially found in the fall at the district warehouse. We need better coordinated management with the district, which is needed to make these programs successful. The district's 2015-20 to 2020 strategic plan does not mention environmental sustainability, even though the city of Evanston has now unanimously supported their third climate action plan and achieved a 24% reduction in greenhouse gas emissions. Meanwhile, rising sea levels, a changing climate, and an ocean full of plastic waste has provided virtually no commitment on climate action nor alignment with the city climate goals. We wonder how the district's next strategic plan will get Evanston's youth ready to implement these ambitious CARP plan. The plan lays out a bold vision that by 2050, Evanston will be a climate-ready and resilient city that has successfully prioritized the needs of its most vulnerable while combating climate change. We wonder how D65 schools will prepare the next generation of environmental stewards without any impactful commitments set out as yet. The mayor specified that CARP's goals to achieve carbon neutrality require a community-wide effort. D65, one of Evanston's largest institutions, must become a leader through bold action and visionary planning. Thank you.
My name is Beatriz Echeverria. I have a third grader at Washington, a ninth grader at Nichols, and a sophomore at ETHS. Okay, so after everything that we've been hearing, we request that District 65 integrates sustainability into all academic subjects at all grade levels. It can be done. Let's take food waste and composting, for example. Right now, around 2,300 District 65 students are composting their food waste every day. If we applied this activity to the social science curriculum, students could learn about access to food, food insecurity and distribution, about how different cultures relate to the food and to food waste. In English class, students could read books about chefs, gardens, harvests, how food gets to their plate, what food means to different cultures. In the science courses, students could take actual compost samples to take a hypothesis, to test a hypothesis and to practice the scientific method. They could also learn about microbes, anaerobic and aerobic decomposition, and they could conduct plant growth experiments, among other activities. In elementary school, teachers could use food waste and compost as a basis for mathematical word problems. In the middle school, students could take actual weight measurements to learn about basic statistical terms such as mean, median, range, etc. What about in the arts curriculum? Just watch the strawberry video from SaveTheFood.org, and you will get an idea of how easy it is to make an emotional connection to our planet and other living beings by using food, and how this can be transformed easily into a song, a drawing, a mural, or even a play. And let's not forget how sustainability is intimately connected to the core values we want to instill into our students: empathy, respect, moderation, discernment, and equitable sharing of resources, just to name a few. Ultimately, we should understand that sustainability is a green lens that can be applied to everything we do and to every lesson we teach or learn. We also request mandatory recycling at all schools, which it's not happening right now. It should be done in the classrooms, in the offices, and in the cafeterias by students and staff, including before and after school activities. We also request an Earth Day, week, or month celebration of environmental heroes, community projects, jobs and sustainability as a starting point for viewing all subjects and actions through an environmental lens. We would also request the hiring of a sustainability coordinator that would standardize efforts throughout the district and contribute to financial sustainability. Many green initiatives seek efficiency and behavior changes that end up benefiting the bottom line. A sustainability coordinator would make sure this happens at District 65. Some potential job responsibilities for this person would include optimizing energy and water usage, advising on purchasing decisions, standardized training for all custodians and school staff, creation and enforcement of district standards to reduce waste in school and at events, overseeing bulk supply programs and end-of-year cleanouts, providing oversight for landfill pickups, educating on resource consumption, and seeking grants to provide funding for some of the aforementioned initiatives. If the district believes that this position can be covered by an already existing employee, This person would serve as an effective liaison with the District 65 Green Teams and would start implementing green strategies immediately. Thank you.
Good evening. My name is Natalia Moreno Polomarkakis, and I went paperless, so excuse me. As a new member of this team, I want to thank all you women that spoke before me and will speak for your dedication and your leadership. Your commitment and passion is contagious, and you've taught me so much. So this group to me represents what's right about Evanston and why I live here. In May, my friend Marilee Aguirre and I decided to attend a Green Team meeting, and we were welcomed by this group and given support and guidance to create a Green Team at Dawes. Since then, Ms. Parison, our interim principal, Ms. Upshaw, Ms. Mishkin, the student council coordinators, Mr. Troop, our head of maintenance, the PTA, and parent event coordinators have collaborated with our mission. That's a lot of people to get on board in such a short time. This team of Dawes staff and parents are all in agreement that environmental sustainability is a priority and must be modeled for our children in school. The most exciting part of creating the Green Team at Dawes for me has been creating the role of greenkeeper in our student council. 10 students were thrilled to run for this position, and 6 received a position. In the student council, there's 3rd and 4th graders, and seeing their enthusiasm and their eagerness to be leaders around issues of sustainability is very encouraging. Oops, that was me. So I just want to remind everybody that in school, not every student feels success academically or in athletics or in arts, and that the act of service is very valuable, and children feel more connected to their school community. Here at the Early Childhood Center, Kate Mason-Schultz, 4 teachers, Lily Masso, Lubin Merkevich, Haley Buffett, and Julie Lepley-Vogel and I have created another green team. So we aim to recycle milk cartons, food containers, and expose our preschoolers to recycling. As a staff, we've been able to eliminate the use of styrofoam and single-use water bottles at the center's events with the support of Sharon Sprague, our new director. This team of early childhood staff are all in agreement that environmental sustainability is a priority and must be modeled for our children at school. From personal experience, I know firsthand how empowering learning about environmental sustainability can be to a child. Because as a 4th grader at Ravinia School in Highland Park, I learned about the 3 R's. And that then became my mantra. So as a 9-year-old, I went home and I insisted that my parents recycle at home, turn off lights, and not let the water run. And I'll remind us that children are change agents. They can go home and they can teach their families what to do and how to be better. So I believe all children in District 65 schools deserve the same opportunity to learn how to care for our earth. And I urge the school board to take into account what you've learned tonight and commit fully to meet the goals of CARP and to meet our demands. Thank you.
Hello. My name is Beth Flintoft. I have a 2nd grader at Willard, and we'll have a son in kindergarten there next year. Within the past year and a half, the District 65 Green Team has accomplished a few important goals. 8 new green teams have been established. The composting pilot began in 6 lunchrooms, now 5, this past fall. And this pilot was activated by us, the Green Team parents, meeting with principals and lunch supervisors and presenting to teachers and then students at each of these schools just before and during the first weeks of school. Styrofoam trays were replaced district-wide with compostable ones, and all are picked up weekly and composted by Collective Resource. The inaugural 10-second film festival was held at Haven last April to showcase students' 10-second film creations about any environmental issue. We're doing that again this April. More eco days were held for students on half days, and the first end-of-year supply collection was held. The enthusiasm from kids and appreciation and the support we've received from parents and staff have helped keep us motivated. Imagine what we together can accomplish if we have the full support of the school board and leadership and resources of the district. Now is the time for action. We need the district to commit, implement, lead, and support. We're proud of this school district and its willingness to take on complex issues. But in regard to sustainability issues, what do we stand for? The issues we are facing with the environment are complex as well, but there are specific actionable steps we can put in place now. Currently, children in 5 of our elementary schools are seeing the difference composting and recycling makes in reducing waste in the lunchroom, and they're seeing the efforts by a few PTAs to use reusable or compostable serviceware for events. Our hope is they'll become responsible consumers by thinking about what happens to the waste they create once it disappears into the recycling, compost, or landfill bins. But we have so much more to do. To echo Bea's statement, in the classrooms, teachers need to be discussing what being a responsible consumer means and practicing conservation, discussing what global warming is, what contributes to it, and what students can do as individuals and as a community to mitigate our contribution, to respect and appreciate nature, that climate change and fossil fuel practices that drive it place a disproportionate burden upon poor communities, especially poor communities of color. To understand what intergenerational equity means, how to become a global citizen, and more. And our children need to see us, parents, principals, teachers, and staff in action to inspire and give them a positive outlook so they feel compelled to play an active role in improving their own community. The first step to a better world is an imagined one. Sustainability must be part of the District 65 strategic plan for the next 5 years. We need a sustainability coordinator. We need to uphold and put into action the commitment to CARP. Environmental issues are undeniably linked to the future well-being of children and communities across the globe. We can't afford a further delay in making this a priority. Reducing our carbon footprint and promoting environmental literacy has always been important, but now it's urgent. We respectfully demand District 65 does its part. Thank you.
Thank you, all the members of the Green Team. Our next speaker will be Jeremy Wilson.
I'm Jeremy Wilson. Can you hear me? The topic is the accountability report, which I hope you can get to. The results reported in the 2018 Achievement and Accountability Report are once again discouraging. They could be anticipated by the Illinois State Park results reported to you in November, which has had no discussion. They estimate that student scoring, you will recall park standards are high. They estimate that students scoring 4 or 5 are meeting or exceeding expectations, that they will be successful in enrolling in a higher educational institution after 12th grade. Based on English language arts scores, 61% of white third graders met or exceeded expectations. Only 15% of black third graders and 19% of Hispanic third graders met or exceeded expectations, page 8. That means by third grade, 85% of black third graders are not predicted to enroll successfully in a community college or university. 81% of Hispanic children are not expected to enroll successfully. These are children standing no higher than my hand. Beginning with the Black Achievement Report in spring 2016, we learned that 89% of black children and 91% of white children who were reading ready in kindergarten met developmental reading assessment benchmarks in third grade. We also learned 2.5 years ago that black and Hispanic children were much less prepared in reading readiness than white children as measured by ISEL scores. This year, only 27% of black and 36% of Hispanic children met ISEL standards at kindergarten. That's in the accountability report. In September 2016, 2.5 years ago, I was assured by Ms. Beardley that material was being developed to help preschool parents prepare their children for kindergarten. It was published this December, 2.5 years later. There is no mention of ISIL standards in the document. It's called A Strong Start to Kindergarten. You all have a copy. Reading readiness is taken up beginning on page 10. There is no mention that entering kindergartners are expected to be able to identify at least 40 out of 56 upper and lower case letters, or be able to tell back a story read to them, both ISIL standards. Instead, in the document, it says the child should know some alphabet letters and know some alphabet letter sounds.
Thank you, sir. Your 3 minutes are up if you'd like to
Have you ever
submit
thought of the child care
written
industry
comments.
as a jobs program? They are very resistant to being held accountable for meeting reading or mathematics readiness standards and preparing a child for kindergarten.
Thank you, sir. I would ask that, could you
2.5
please
years of
submit your
delay,
comments to us in writing
They were
so we can move on to
successful
the
with
next?
District 65. Black and brown children and their parents are the losers for life.
Thank you. Our next speaker will be Carrie Levin.
Good evening, everybody. My name is Carrie Levin. I'm the Executive Director of Evanston CASE. We provide support and advocacy services for Evanston families whose children have disabilities. Over 13% of students in District 65 have IEPs, individual education plans. That is over 1,000 students. Moreover, many more District 65 students have disabilities but are supported through 504 plans. Despite this substantial number, the administration does not provide an annual special education report that you and the public can review. That is not to say that these students are ignored by the board or the administration. On the contrary, board members often focus on data that relates to students with disabilities. However, because there is not a specific report and there is no dedicated agenda item around special education, the particular challenges and inequities weighing upon this population go unexamined. To fill this void, Evanston CASE has called the available achievement data to provide a larger picture of how students with disabilities are faring in the district. We sent a copy of this report to all of you. The picture is largely disappointing and is certainly unacceptable, notwithstanding the fact that district staff work very hard to provide students with an appropriate education. Unfortunately, the data tells us that students with disabilities in this district are largely not succeeding. In fact, they are the lowest scoring demographic group on virtually all measures of achievement. Let that sink in for a second. As a result, many of our students are likely to struggle in high school and beyond. They will have difficulty being successful in college, finding jobs, and living on their own. Unless this district takes bold action, these students will be left behind. We ask that you review this data with intentionality. Ask the hard questions in order to evaluate the causes of students with disabilities' declining performance. Fulfill your equity statement commitment to examine the educational practices, policies, and processes that may contribute to the predictability of achievement of students with IEPs. And direct the administration to analyze and report out annually on the state of special education in District 65. Ask that they create an action plan to remediate deficiencies, redress the opportunity gap, and ensure that students with disabilities are on a path of continuous improvement. Although none of this data should be surprising to you, we hope that seeing it emphasized in our report in this way startles you to action. Thank you all.
Thank you. Roger Williams.
Good evening, everyone. In preparing for this meeting, I took a look at the 2018 Achievement and Accountability Report. And there was a couple of things that really stood out to me. I mean, it's a good piece of writing here. For example, the Racial and Educational Equity Statement, just paraphrase of just part of it. The district must work proactively to acknowledge racial and cultural biases and eliminate institutional structures and practices that affect student learning and achievement. And then there's from the strategic plan. The strategic plan establishes the goal to improve the performance of all student demographic groups as a means to promote among students with particular emphasis on Black and Hispanic Latinx opportunity gaps. The district recognizes the urgency of its equity focus and is committed to improving the outcomes of marginalized students. Those are very, very impressive statements. And based on these statements, an outsider might conclude that District 65 is getting it done. They're really getting it on. They're really making inroads in the achievement opportunity gap. But the results tell the real story. In ISO, only 27.6% of Black students at District 65 are considered kindergarten ready on ISO. Ironically, in the report on Black student achievement in District 65 back in, I believe it was 2016, distributed in 2016, it stated that 34% of Black students enter District 65 with a level of early literacy skills considered kindergarten ready. The results are worse now than they were 3 years ago. And moving on the DRA, according to the Development Reading Assessment administered to grades K through 3, only 66.7% of Black students are meeting DRA benchmarks, down 2.3% from the previous year. On the other hand, 90.7% of white kids meet DRA benchmarks. And finally, MAPS. Only 32% of Black students are meeting or exceeding college readiness benchmarks for reading, contrasted with 82.2% of white students. And finally, only 20.7% of Black students are meeting or exceeding college readiness benchmarks for math, while 79.2% of white kids meet DRA benchmark. Your walk does not match your talk. Those are very, very fine statements you have written, but your walk does not match your talk. Your equity statement and strategic plan paint a picture that does not match reality. The Black community in Evanston needs and deserves results, not inspiring verbiage that is not accompanied by plans to actually move the needle. Thank you.
Thank you. And our final speaker will be Meg Crewley.
Hi, I have a little bit of a cold, so pardon me. I'm gonna hold the water away from the computer. Hi, everybody, thanks. This year, DEC is excited to announce that our educators are participating in Black Lives Matter at School Week of Action. This is a national movement of organizing for racial justice in education. DEC has joined together with our administration and PTA to participate for the week of February 4th through 8th. During this week, we are looking forward to educators embedding lessons about Black history, intersectional Black identities, and institutional racism into the curriculum. Throughout the week, educators and students will be reflecting upon lessons on topics related to Black immigrant youth, Black women empowerment, Black LGBTQ community, and Black history. The intent is to affirm the lives of Black students, educators, and families and caregivers, and our values for an equitable and racially just public school system by engaging in action, empowerment, and solidarity within District 65 and beyond. DEC supports and promotes the goals and demands of this week, which include 1, ending zero tolerance policies and replacing them with restorative justice practices. Restorative justice practices have proven to be a more powerful and effective tool in the reduction of disproportionate discipline. 2, hiring and mentoring Black educators. We recognize the importance and value of students seeing themselves reflected in educators in their schools. There are far too few Black educators and educators of color in proportion to the number of students of color in our district. 3, mandating that ethnic studies be taught in pre-K through 12 schools in age-appropriate ways. The creation and implementation of an ethnic studies curriculum is of critical importance to supporting the diversity of our students. 4, funding counselors, not police in schools. We value the ways that counselors support students, families, and caregivers, and would want to see more dollars going towards the hiring of these needed professionals. During the 2017-2018 school year, educators in over 20 cities participated in this week of action, including Seattle, Philadelphia, Los Angeles, Chicago, Detroit, Boston, New York City, Baltimore, Washington, D.C., and more. DEC is encouraging members and the community to wear a Black Lives Matter shirt or the color black to school on Friday, February 8th. We are excited that District 65 in Evanston, Illinois will be added to the list of participants this year. We look forward to this week being a springboard of action, engagement, and solidarity for our community as we continue our forward motion to create a district that promotes equity and understanding for all children of color and diverse identities. Thank you to the district leadership for partnering with us this year. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, thank you, everybody. With that, we will move on to our proposed action items. Sergio, do you want to take the motion?
I move that the Board of Education accept the recommendations outlined in the attached group motion and approve the appointments, leaves, and separations, appeal determination under uniform grievance procedure, December 28 board meeting minutes, destruction of December 2016 closed session audio recording, December 2018 budget amendment.
Second.
Hernandez.
Yes.
Cohen.
Yes.
Mendoza.
Yes.
Halpern.
Yes.
Tanya Booty.
Yes.
Cartha.
Yes. Anya, can you?
I move that the Board of Education approve the suggested amendments to the Early Head Start and Head Start program governing bylaws.
Second.
Katrina was here.
Miss Katrina?
Katrina, did you have any presentation you wanted to?
No, but did you have anything?
Did you have anything you wanted to let us specifically state about it, or?
Hello, everyone. It's the annual approval, and the only updates were the numbers changed from 180 to 129. So as a result, some proportion numbers changed, and it's because we reduced our numbers last year and added full day. Any questions?
Any questions? Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Hernandez.
Yes.
Cohen.
Yes.
Mendoza.
Yes.
Halpern.
Yes.
Tanya Booty.
Yes.
Cartha.
Yes. We will move on to the first of our two discussion items, the first being our culturally responsive teaching update. If Jamila and Stacy want to.
Good evening, everyone.
Good evening.
All right. So Dr. Stacy Beasley and I have prepared a report for you. I believe you have that report. Won't be reading that to you, but we are going to lead, I'll give you a little bit of a recap of what's in there and have a bit of an activity for you to do. We want to let you know that this report helps us think about the fact that reflection gives direction. We revisited the Black Student Achievement Report, the Hispanic Student Achievement Report, the District Equity Statement, specifically the points that were lifted up earlier, that we have a commitment and a challenge to accelerate the learning of historically underserved and marginalized students. Our reflection gives direction because we're reminded of the work of the scholars that we have visited. We know that the seminal scholar on culturally relevant pedagogy is Gloria Ladson-Billings, and you all know all the names: Geneva Gay, Jeff Duncan Andrade, Chris Emden, Claude Steele, Amanda, John Diamond, Amanda Lewis, all the people who've been here in our local community and people that we have gone to see, the articles we've read, the book studies that we've had. So we have really been engaging in educating ourselves on the work. Ultimately, we landed on the model of Zaretta Hammond because it specifically speaks to two important aspects of learning. Well, first of all, because it really gives us some details about how to implement it in practice, and the two profound aspects being culture and the brain. So before we talk a little bit more about the model, I want to lead you through a kind of activity because, as they say, I can show you better than I can tell you, right? I will be asking each of you to participate in a little activity, and we will need some people to be, you're going to plan an itinerary, and we need a couple of people to be observers of the group, and we need about 4 people in the group to do the activity. Everybody game? Who would like to be an observer? The people who are going to observe will be asked to observe 2 specific things. One person will be observing elements of collectivism, looking for how does the task require people to work together. The other person will be looking for the cognitive demands in the task, what thinking skills are required in the task. So that's what the observers are going to do. And the other people are going to have the joy of actually doing the task. So I hope it's fun for everybody, all right? Who would like to be an observer? We just need 2 people. And I think we probably have enough for 3 groups, because I think everybody who's sitting around should participate, because no one should be idle during this activity, all right? Anybody? You would like to be an observer? Sure, okay.
I'm willing to be an observer.
Okay, all right. Okay. All right.
Jamila, I'm willing to be an observer, but we just need the 2 for the whole?
Always room for another observer. All right, so what we're going to do is I'm going to give each, any questions about the task, about the, well, let me explain a little bit more first. All right, I'm going to give you some materials. You're going to begin to develop an itinerary for a visit to the Museum of Science and Industry. So I'm going to give you some materials. I'm going to ask each person in your group of 4 people to pick out one element in the materials that you really want to have on the itinerary. And then your group is going to have a discussion about what you need to consider in developing the itinerary. You have 2 kinds of constraints. That is the fact, the time that you'll be there is from 10 o'clock to 2:30. You need to allow 30 minutes for lunch. Only one of your activities can have a fee-based ticket with it, and you need to pick one activity that is interactive. All right, do you understand the constraints of the task? Okay, so let's do groups of 4, starting over here. We will have, let's come down here with Brother Raphael. Okay, you all give the 4. You all have the material. And these 2 ladies are going to be moving, so you guys are going to merge, and you all are going to be moving. Okay?
You all are familiar with
These
this museum, pretty familiar.
Take out something first.
These are the exhibits currently being offered.
You're on the trip. Okay?
Is there any
possibility, the extra copies, just so that members who are out there can follow along and see what we're looking at.
One should be interactive.
So we can choose from the map? Well, you're gonna watch, right? But we have to figure it out.
Or you would vote.
No, they're gonna. Oh, she's. You're actually.
Have a fee.
During the trip, each person pick one thing that you want to do.
So then here's the levels.
Oh, yeah.
Free time. There's a map of the museum, and then there's
Included.
tickets.
This is included. That's the only one.
So there's a chilling record of change. I've seen these.
Yeah, that's the only one.
Actually, I recommend it since we're having a conversation about
It can be
sustainability.
included.
Be part of the solution. Same thing about sustainability. Get the big
One thing they want to have as part of the itinerary.
It's another
One thing they want to have.
What's the age group
So-
you're taking? Do these have?
Which are the,
Yes, I think this in addition to like the regular,
This one says.
maybe like the regular exhibits that you can
Doesn't
visit.
The life science experiences. So then the life science experiences, when you walk in, it's free. So when you
Fee-based.
kind of walk up and explore on your own. Right? No time like the huge. Got it. Okay.
One day saw
Included in museum entry, right? There's the Smith's maintenance. These are our choices. Patterns surrounding and consideration. And wonder is all natural. Question about the one we get almost. So,
This is the only start at 10. Oh, okay. This it takes 45 minutes.
when it comes to energy.
One choice of something.
that will be our one.
That's our one ticket.
Where did you see time?
If you start with
So
one
the
choice,
life
it
science
doesn't mean you have to
experience.
stick with that forever. Go ahead and make the choice.
You have to make part of the solution.
You have to make decisions about sustainability.
If you start with one choice, you don't have to stick with that forever. Each person make one choice of an item that you want to have on the itinerary. It's just a starting place.
This is a video. Yeah, it is, right? And it's free.
Has everyone made a choice?
I will do
If you
part
have
of
a choice, it doesn't mean you're stuck with that forever.
That's one choice.
Ticketed and interactive.
No, each individual should get a choice about what you as an individual want to have on the itinerary.
Are we limited to just the things that
I
we
guess
have?
like considerations or what are we going
You
for?
will, at the end of the process, or in the beginning, each person should pick one thing that they
Yeah,
want to
there's
have.
other items in the
Part of
map, right? So you
Social
can
studies,
go
science,
bowling,
one of those sheets.
airplane, and then there's
considerations.
the
Citations is where we're at, and everybody's one of the pieces. So we can pick activities,
right?
exploring
But we have to,
section.
but we also have to consider where they are and how long.
Right, because we have to give
Has
lunch.
each person picked one thing?
No.
Okay.
We're very simple.
Okay, remember, you don't have to stick with it forever, so you can just get yourself started by
Alright,
picking
fine.
at least one thing, and then you guys will go through asking yourselves the questions about what you need to consider to finalize your choice.
Okay, so
I like those life science experiences.
I'll write it down. Chicken scratch, life sciences.
It engages us.
Everybody picked one thing?
Yeah.
Pick one thing that you
Saw
want?
that's right, yep.
That was what you were hoping to have. Which one?
I chose get the big picture.
Okay, what did you select? All right.
And what does it give us?
Oh, interesting. Okay.
How about
All right.
yourself?
So then you guys need to go through the, each of your selections and ask yourselves, based on that choice, how does it meet the criteria that we talked about? Okay?
Yeah.
So in honor of
This is the
Circus
criteria.
exhibit, okay, circus exhibit.
What did you?
Be part of the solution.
Another 30 seconds, then we're gonna just pause.
I'd like to
Okay?
pick the chicks, which are just up the stairs. from
Chicks.
Everybody Okay, it's okay, and you're not gonna finish it, it's okay, another 30 seconds, and we're gonna stop.
The considerations near the circus exhibit. Right.
Yeah. Well, and it's also,
Interact.
you might be there the whole time and see nothing.
Yours is the only one that's timed for 45 minutes.
Or we might say we want to spend 30 minutes there, and right as one's starting to hatch, and then it's longer.
Arrival times.
Okay,
The only one that's timed is 45 minutes.
I think we just picked it now. She's going to tell us what to do next.
We are going to accept non-closure. I'm going to ask you to return to your seats, and we're going to hear a little bit from our observers. We're going to accept non-closure. I know that you have not finished the task. You may return to your seats.
How much at each?
Right, this is just. All right, we're gonna hear a little bit from each of our observers. So you might remember that in the Zaretta Hammond model of culturally responsive pedagogy, collectivism is an aspect of culture that is really emphasized. So for those who were observing, what comments did you, what observations did you make about the ways the task required input from the entire group?
Based on asking questions for either clarification or to just check for understanding.
Okay, all people were asking questions. What else did you notice?
Folks were sharing their experiences that informed their preferences.
Okay, sharing their experiences, good. Anything else?
The team was, they were sharing the directions and asking clarifying questions of each other, and reviewed the experiences together to make sure that everybody understood what the task was.
Okay, all right, those are some of the observations about collectivism. Let's hear a few comments about what you observed, about what thinking was required to complete the task.
Some people tapped into some prior knowledge.
What do you mean by that?
Relating it to previous experiences, either at the museum itself or planning an itinerary before.
Okay, all right. Anything else?
The group also was just moving into figuring out maps and location and time, thinking about the 4-hour stretch.
Okay, okay.
There were a good number of executive skills that were being used to organize the itinerary and the priorities within the scope of the exercise.
Certainly, certainly. All right, so you've shared with me some observations. I'm going to share a few things with you. One of the things I love about this work is that it's quite organic. So you conceive of something, but when you put it on its feet, immediately you realize, I didn't think about that. For example, I did not say specifically to the group that the choices that I gave you were your only choices. So being the independent spirits that some of you are, you chose items that were on the map. So that would be something that I would have to be thinking about. And the reason I say that is because when we go on a trip to the museum, especially a place like the Museum of Science and Industry, it is so big. There's so much you can be learning there. We want to be making sure that we're focused on something. So the selections that I gave you actually align with the theoretical or the instructional plans that this class was studying something in environmental sciences. So as the teacher, I went on to the site ahead of time and selected the exhibits that related to environmental science, because the intention was that whatever you selected, it was going to align with our instructional goals. But I didn't make that choice clear. That's all right, right? But this is one of the things that you learn when you're putting lessons on their feet, and it's okay. Because we would have had other ways to get to that. But the idea of giving 7 different choices to 4 people provides controlled choice. So that provides empowerment for the students. And we should have been starting where everybody was feeling like, wow, I'm going to have a solid stake in the itinerary for this event. Does that resonate with you? So you can see how, so the idea of culture, the idea of collectively we're building something, but we all have an equal share. The fact that I think this group over here figured out that we really needed to spread out the resources so that everyone had access to them, because I only gave you one set on purpose. That's part of the design of the lesson, so that you're required to share the resources. So these are intentional decisions that are made in the Zaretta Hammond model of culturally responsive pedagogy. In terms of the thinking, you hit the nail on the head. There are so many executive functioning skills that are there. There was certain kinds of noticing. Some people noticed right away where it said the time of the exhibit, or whether or not the ticket, there was a ticket required. So it's calling attention to details and details that are important for the decision making. So that's some of the noticings are some of the cognitive routines that we need to develop, because what we know about some of our students is we put a load of information in front of them and they have not disciplined themselves to attend to very small features that can be very decisive when you're making decisions. So that's, again, part of the cognitive routines you want to develop in this kind of lesson. I could go on and on and on about some of the intentions in the lesson, but those are all of the factors that you are navigating when you're trying to design for culturally responsive pedagogy. Any other quick questions about the experience or reactions before I go into our next part?
Is this an example lesson?
Yes, yes.
And what grade level?
As I was thinking about it, sitting at a desk, I thought, fifth grade would probably be the youngest, but more like middle school because of the number of things to navigate. So I was also thinking how, if it was a younger grade, how I would have to adjust it if it was going to be for younger students. Again, all of that is part of the design that we need to think through when you're designing these kinds of lessons. Other questions or comments about the experience? Okay. All right. So I guess the last piece I would say, the reason I wanted to do it this way, Gandhi invites us to be the change we want to see in the world. So the biggest part of the work is actually doing it. So we have been working in groups of varying sizes, trying to create culturally responsive, pedagogically designed experiences for students and for teachers. And we have been all over the country gathering information, as I said before, but Zaretta Hammond herself says you shouldn't try to move too far too fast with this work, because you can see how complicated it is. Instead, she asks us to consider taking small bites, thinking about culture and cognitive demand when we are shaping learning experiences. And as we flex that muscle, over time, it gets stronger and stronger. So that is probably the biggest learning piece, because we did a lot of reading, a lot of studying, but it wasn't until I started to actually apply the work that I realized how complicated it is, how many factors you're trying to negotiate, and that it is best done collectively. So when I am crafting a lesson by myself, I think I have some pretty great ideas, but it's not until I started having some conversations with my colleagues that I realized, I didn't think about that, I didn't think about that. And that is another important aspect of us being able to build and sustain this work. So as we were saying, reflection gives us direction, and the other thing that's really important is we have done Beyond Diversity, we have done SEED, and educators have been regularly saying, okay, what is next? This is a convergence of all of those efforts that will equip us to better serve students who have been historically marginalized and underserved. And I'm fully committed to the work and appreciative of all of the educators in the district who are as committed as I am. Other questions about our work on culturally responsive pedagogy?
When you say it's a convergence of Beyond Diversity and SEED, in what ways do you see it?
Well, one of the things that we are starting to get more feedback from educators, people are much more aware of representations in the curriculum or aspects of the curriculum that are causing them to question. Now, I want to say that alongside something else. What you might notice about the experience that we had, that it would not be what you would call culturally specific. Even though there is there's a black art exhibit that's at the museum that I'm actually thinking about going to, I specifically did not include that in the sample because I want to show that it's not about race or ethnicity when you're talking about culturally responsive pedagogy. In Zaretta Hammond's model, she is specifically saying we have to build the cognitive capacity of young people, and one of the ways that we do that is we have them work collectively. Independence is another aspect of it that we've addressed, so those two things sit side by side, but I just want to make that part clear.
I think also, Anya, just kind of speaking about it from a more
Stacy,
global
can you just make sure you're talking to the?
Oh, all right, apologies. The table that's on page 4 of the memo, but within the packet that has Zaretta Hammond's framework, pulls out the 4 practice areas: awareness, learning partnerships, community of learners and learning environment, and information processing. And if we look at that and really think about some of those key priorities that we've elevated within the district: school climate work, restorative practices, the work within teaching and learning, when we talk about really trying to understand our students to inform instruction in MTSS and equity learning, the ideas are very much present in Hammond's framework, and Hammond's framework in many ways can show how these ideas connect and help to lift up the work. So I feel that it shows intersection for much of the work that the district has chosen to put a great deal of priority into, and intersects it in a place where we're really thinking about what happens in the classroom with our students.
Thank you.
Did you have a question?
Yeah, so, one of my questions, again, and I don't know if I might have missed this, but again, I see it in the framework, and for me, it's really important is that connection. Parents are the first teachers, so making sure that we have that connection at home, and I know, we're providing, we offer community trainings around SEED and Beyond Diversity, which is again an incredible offering, which I hope we continue doing. But again, as we think about as we move forward. With culturally responsive practice, just ensuring that we have this communication and we communicate even after the trainings, and I'd like to see that addressed more intentionally as we continue on with this work. And again, like Ms. Hammond says, we have to take it in small bites, right? But again, we have these incredible groups that already exist that engage parents, like the BPAC group, the African American Caribbean Parent Group. Those folks again would be really great, and it would be great to present this to them in regards to just to show them what we're trying to do to educate their children and to be responsive to their needs, right? So just an observation.
We can certainly do that.
I'm curious to hear more about how students have responded.
Well, my response about students' response is so colored by my work with ACC because I see those students every day. So what I will say, first of all, is there's an intersection between the work of culturally responsive pedagogy and African-centered pedagogy. So this idea of collectivism and the making meaning intersect. So one of the things, so having said that, daily we have our morning routine, and we are regularly tossing out questions that require students to be generative in their thinking. So over time, what we're beginning to notice is students, of course, often present a hesitance because they seem to always want a right answer. So what you saw in this experience is we craft questions where there's no right answer, where you actually have to think and be willing to share your thinking. So over time, we're seeing more willingness to be spontaneous and actually share the thought that's on your mind rather than censoring that thought by checking to think, is it right or not?
From throughout the district, do we have any feedback from teachers about how their students are responding to the culturally responsive lessons that they've created?
So one of the things that we're doing, I think there's so many different people who are taking on the work. Some schools are taking it on in different ways. I happen to work with a group of teachers, there are about 9 of them, and working through the design is the hard part. So there's still a lot of uneasiness about that. So I don't necessarily would say that teachers are ready to say, oh, I did this and it leads to that. But I think they are beginning to feel that they're trying some things to work differently to make I don't want to say more open-ended because teachers have always been doing that. But this idea of trying to construct a task that requires collaboration and that is simultaneously open-ended is craft work, and teachers are building their confidence in that area.
Thank you.
How do we, I know that it seems like schools get to pick and choose what they want to do, but how does that
ensure some sort of like consistency across the district, that everyone is under the same understanding. I can't say that after this activity, I feel like we all took away the same lesson or clearly understood the activity. So if I'm confused, I'm wondering how are schools receiving this?
So again, there are different aspects of the work that people can be investigating. So the small group of teachers who voluntarily come 2 hours after school on a regular basis and spend some of our half-day Wednesdays, there's a more intense kind of work with it. Other people are still familiarizing themselves with the aspects of the work and looking for the intersections of this work with all the other work that is going on. So that's also something we have to acknowledge and help teachers navigate. What is the intersection of culturally relevant pedagogy with sheltered instruction, with understanding by design, with differentiation, with our literacy framework, with our next generation science standards? So teachers are involved in all kinds of work that's going to enrich instructional moves. So we need to make sure that they can see the connections. I don't know if that directly answered your question.
You know, and Rebecca, to pick up on it a little bit, so schools have been working through the school climate team work, and the third phase of school climate team is to move into culturally responsive pedagogy. And we have 3 schools that just began that cycle this month, where they're diving into, as the kind of the third phase, diving into culturally responsive pedagogy. And that work will continue over the next year, and it began with an inventory taking a look at the awareness practice area, and we'll move through some additional learning in those practice areas this spring. Second piece of it is that the professional learning that Jamila led in collaborative design with over the summer was delivered to several hundred educators. Yet, when you return into your environments, it's difficult to pick up sometimes and sustain. And so we're looking for those opportunities to continue to connect. Our department chairs and instructional coaches have had some ongoing professional learning, and they've made a commitment to design in elements of culturally responsive pedagogy, either through modeling or delivery of content during their district half days. So that's creating exposure for teachers across the district. And then last point is that there are 6 schools that within their school work planning process committed to advancing the culturally responsive pedagogy work in a manner that they felt best fit their schools this year. So there are different ways in which we are working to make sure that all educators have experience, but then the goal ultimately is to create environments that have an ongoing learning cycle. And our hope is that with our schools, as they move into the third phase of school climate work, we're able to get some of that sustained contact and learning, where educators have the opportunity to design, to try something out, get feedback, and keep learning in a safe and supportive learning community. Because a lot of what Hammond outlines in these practice areas is also what our educators need to be able to advance this practice.
Okay. So a lot of this feedback, I feel like is coming from you. I'd be interested in hearing from the teachers how they're receiving this and how it's being received by students. I understand the model, but as part of our commitment to including that people see themselves in what's being delivered in the classroom, I don't feel like I see that connection just yet, and being able to actualize the curriculum that's currently in place versus the technique by which teachers in schools select what it is that they're delivering as part of their instruction.
No, and we are early in this work. And this work takes time and reflection. And so your challenge is absolutely right, and we want to be able to measure the impact of the work as we move forward, but we're working to get the conditions in place where educators are supported to do this in an ongoing manner. And some of the early seeds of the PLC and some of the work through department chairs and alignment in some of the disciplines is helpful, but that is where we need to go.
I would add that some of the work that's being done in some of the other areas, for example, the next generation science standards, we might not necessarily label it culturally responsive pedagogy, but it certainly has all of the markers. When we were designing the session this summer, teachers who had been involved in that work said, oh, this is just like we're doing there. So the label of the work isn't as important as the quality of the work. So people may be engaged in the work and not call it culturally responsive pedagogy, because what we do know is that one of the essential markers is it has a clear purpose, that it has that collectivism, that safe, environment for learning, and that it is going to build cognitive capacity in students. So those are some of the markers. So even if people don't call it culturally responsive pedagogy, it can be happening in other places. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I guess I'm just curious how that's going to be embedded, you know, so you have like your core team of teachers that are committed to it now, but as new teachers come into the school district, how do we maintain that in-house and in school, right? So the teachers could transfer to another school, and then that changes the work, and just ensuring that it's, you know, it's not like differing from school to school.
Yes, and I'm glad that you're saying that. That's why we are specific about saying we're doing the Zaretta Hammond model of culturally responsive pedagogy. There are lots of models out there, so people can say that they're doing it. If we are not accelerating student learning, then we're not doing it well enough. So we are hearing what you're saying, and so it's not just this model. This is a lens to help us evaluate some of the changes that we're needing to make. And as Stacey said, we're early in the work, because I think one of the things we're trying to figure out is how do we strengthen while we're doing the other things at the same time? How do we integrate the work so it's not another thing that we're laying on top of, but that we recognize how it is integrated with all of the instructional improvement that we're regularly doing.
Can I ask how, if at all, we're leveraging our ACC educators who you said have been utilizing these practices in order to offer African-centered curriculum? How are we utilizing their experience and expertise to lift this district-wide?
Well, what the ACC teachers do is twice a month we meet after school, and we're regularly involved in curriculum design. So that serves as a kind of foundation, as a thinking space for launching ideas that are spread elsewhere. I think there are two ACC teachers who volunteered for the culturally responsive pedagogy group. So, no, actually 3. I think they make 3. Yeah, so there's lots of sharing going on there as well.
And is there teachers from the bilingual program or the dual language program as well involved, or?
Well, the bilingual director is involved in our leadership work. I think that we have a bilingual teacher. I don't think we have a bilingual teacher in the, we call it the CRB group.
Yeah.
But people, of course, the bilingual teachers are involved in their buildings, and certain buildings are taking on the work too.
Again, I think one of the pieces is that should be essential, and I've seen it in some classes, but again, it's inconsistent. Is again, by design, dual language instruction should have that cultural component, right? And actually, culturally responsive pedagogy is by law. It's part of school code.
Yes.
But again. Yeah, the hope is that, again, with the continued work with the Hammond model, that, again, we really try to make it something that's embedded, that is expected of anybody who works here, if they leave or not. But again, having that strong, that lens to be able to utilize when you deliver, next generation science standards, social studies, which I want to just give a shout out to the Nichols problem solver. So there was an email that was sent, I think, to administrators as well as board members from students at Nichols with the direction of teachers who, and this to me speaks to, it's very, very indicative of how culturally responsive work should function, is that they asked us, the leadership, okay, so why is it that kids in the middle school that seem to be, when they get to middle school, aren't doing so well in social studies, right? And they pose the question of practice to us, and I think that I think is an incredible way to involve kids. It's where they're working together, and trying to help problem solve with the adults, and whatever we can do to again leverage our students' curiosity with our parents' desire to know what their kids are learning, and then the work that we do here at the at the high levels here of policy and practice. It would be great and to integrate. And again, it's like I said, take it in bites. We're in our initial stages, but Again, I think we're headed in a good direction, but again, I know teachers out there also have expressed that they've taken the trainings, but again, they're still having a hard time with it, but hopefully that we can smooth that out.
Yes, I'd like to mention that in the beginning of the year, so when we're talking about the leaders, the bilingual team, when they were designing the new teacher orientation, we designed it specifically introducing some of the practices of culturally responsive pedagogy. And some principals are trying to apply those, that design to their professional learning in their buildings. Because again, we have to be the change. We actually have to do it. It's not a checklist. There's not, you know, she's got some suggestions of things, but it's the actual doing of the work that is going to be the best way that we're going to build our capacity to better serve our students.
Absolutely. And then, you know, to build on that again, and this is the theme that I heard earlier today from the Green Team, is that again, it's up to us as leaders, right, in this community, in the school district, to be able to implement those challenges and stick with those commitments. I know there was, and something to kind of help piggyback off of this and implement it. I know right now nationally, Illinois State University is offering a micro-credential to leadership, to principals. So they're running a pilot for an equity micro-credential, right? That takes into account a lot of the elements that are talked about here in Zaretta Hammond's model of culturally responsive pedagogy, and something that I encourage us to maybe explore and look at. It's a pilot. They're looking for about 230 principals across the state to pilot this micro-credential that, again, incorporates a lot of these elements that we see here on the Hammond models.
I know you have a full agenda, so I don't want to take too much of your time, but we did want to just let you know that there is a lot of energy that's being put into building our capacity with culturally responsive pedagogy. So we certainly welcome more of your questions, comments, and observations, and just know that we're going to keep on working because the work is that important.
Yeah, I just had one other question. Was there any reason why we were being ambiguous about what schools have adopted this work as part of their school work plan and as part of their year 3 culture and climate work?
So I wasn't necessarily choosing to be ambiguous, but I think the important thing to understand is that schools are in different places on the school climate work, and safety and relationships do come first in the model, but also are extremely important and foundational within the CRP work. And so I don't think there's judgment one way or the other. There's schools that have started at different times. There's schools that are moving through the school climate process, and ultimately the goal is the same, which is to have schools that have strong safety relationships and can move into a space of applying that into increasingly culturally responsive classrooms.
Okay. Well, could you remind us what schools are in year 3?
I would have to pull up the list.
Okay. Should we try to go from memory?
I'd rather not, because I'd rather not do it. I'd rather not give you a list that is not correct. So if I can provide that for you, I would rather do that and make sure I can verify it and give you the correct names.
Okay.
Okay.
Right. Thank you.
So I'll send it your way.
I just have one quick question. It's probably not quick now that we've been talking about it for half an hour. In this work that's so important, in the spirit of providing a guaranteed and viable curriculum and learning experience, to what degree is this really an opt-in for educators right now, and at what point does it no longer become an opt-in? Because I'm thinking about my children's school experience, where they have people who do this to different degrees, and I can tell based on how they talk about things when they come home. To have an experience where somebody is delivering content in this multifaceted way that is tending to all of the aspects of the model one year, and then jump to a classroom the next year where that's not happening, seems to be a really big lost opportunity. But if you have building teams vertically that are committed to it, then you can start, growing this. And at what point is that no longer a choice, but rather an expectation of the work for 65?
One of the conversations that and Stacey will correct me if I go too far, one of the conversations that we're having on the curriculum instruction team has to do with the fact that there are many important things that we need to do. So we're talking about what are our professional learning priorities and how do we design a professional learning system that is viable? Because when you have the number of different priorities that we have, everybody can't do everything. So how can we be more strategic to make sure that we're building capacities in ways that are sustainable, that you don't just get an intro to CRP and you don't hear about it again for 3 years? Maybe one team member got that as a focus. Maybe another team member is doing the NGSS. We've got a new social studies thing that's rolling out. We've got new literacy pieces that are happening. So we have to think very intentionally and strategically about the time we have available for professional learning. How do we structure it so that there are some things that are led district-wide, that we have opportunities for independent investigation and development, and that we are making the work integrated in a way that it's more coherent and it doesn't feel as burdensome as it can feel when you have so many priorities.
So that all makes sense. And as we're about to talk about an accountability report, I guess in the spirit of accountability, at some point Beyond Diversity was an idea. It became an investment. It became a trial. People started doing it in small cohorts. It grew, and at some point, the district leadership team said, we're committed to this, and by this date, everybody's going to have it, right? And we're going to expect everybody to have this experience and to have this this baseline of an expectation for how people are operating within the district. And maybe it's not tonight, but as a future update, it would be interesting to see what that long-term vision for this kind of work looks like, because it is really powerful and it's impactful. And if it's something that we believe is important for everybody, it would be nice to have a goal, even if it's hard to reach. You know, high expectations aren't the worst thing in the world to say out loud. But that would be something that would be nice to see.
And I would offer that, you know, maybe part of it is thinking about, just like when we, you know, rolled out our equity statement and equity policy and the equity trainings, we were intentional about not talking about it as an equity initiative, because that makes it seem like a separate outside thing, but rather equity is sort of the lens through which we would make decisions going forward. I think similarly, if we think about culturally relevant pedagogy or culturally responsive pedagogy as sort of the lens through which we view curriculum. And so it's not a separate thing that people need to learn, but kind of the way we do it. That I think should be the end goal, and maybe it's part of framing it that way. And I think we do have a program that does that successfully in ACC. So maybe the more that we can lift up those educators and their experiences and how they embed culturally relevant pedagogy in all the core subjects that they're teaching to their students, that can be a model that is used district-wide.
So I do want to say, while the ACC teachers have been committed to this work for a long time, I don't want to offer ACC teachers as experts in culturally responsive pedagogy. I think we would all say that we are learning alongside other individuals. So I just don't want to have a misconception that, oh, they've got it all figured out and they're just holding all the answers to themselves because they don't want to share. Do you know what I'm saying? So it's the work is quite complex. Our students are quite complex. And I think one of the things that I will say about the ACC teachers is that their commitment to continually give of themselves, and they just have a personal drive that really helps sustain the power that's needed to tend to the work, because it's not easy work.
I think, just in response to those two pieces, we are working towards a long-term goal while trying to keep in perspective how to balance the other very important priorities that we have. And I think just to kind of close this a little bit is culturally responsive pedagogy in centers itself in several different places. We're trying to do work on the what teachers have in their hands to teach that will support some to move to that space. We're trying to support others in the how do I go about doing this when I have unique and diverse classrooms and I need to further deepen my awareness in the way I build relationships and those types of things. And that moves into how do we do this in a sustained, supportive way over time. And so we really, I think in looking at the memo, there's a lot of good learning that we're putting in place, and our plan is to continue to accelerate that learning and get it into learning cycles. And Hammond does always take us back to, she's like, it's not a bag of tricks. It takes time and reflection, and I do really see that as this lifts, it's going to be the intersection of the equity learning, it's going to be the intersection of shifting of materials, it's going to be the ongoing awareness and work and reflection of educators that will allow this to take off. And we are working really hard to build the foundation and set the longer term goal.
And it's about building teacher leadership to be able to carry this throughout the district. Which goes back to Rebecca's question,
Working
which is
with
where's
our
the consistency as we grow the teacher leaders? That becomes a consistent lens by which we do our work.
And I just want to say I'm excited about this, and I appreciate the depth of thought that has gone into the memo, and as well as rolling out the knowledge to our institution. I want to add that parents and guardians are also will also be really impactful in sustaining these efforts, and that's part of the reason why I was asking what schools. I'm wondering if the parents and guardians in those schools know that this is an emphasis and are viewing themselves as partners in helping to sustain the work of our educators in this way. And it's a really useful opportunity. Speaking of our community sharing circles, this is a useful opportunity for children and adults alike to maybe broaden some of their learning and thinking together at school and at home.
No, I appreciate that, and I appreciate the challenge too. I do absolutely hear that we need to get better at putting out that practice and working with our families, because part of this is bringing the assets of families into the buildings. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much for the presentation. We will move on to our next discussion item, which is our Achievement and Accountability Report.
So let me kick this off with a few comments, and then Kylie will present the PowerPoint, the data, and then we'll open it up for conversation with all of us. Tonight we present in one document the Achievement and Accountability Report, presenting data from the 17-18 school year. These data report on performance on different assessments during the third year of implementation of our current strategic plan. The data represent information that our principals, our school improvement, and our school climate teams used over this past summer to set goals and plan for this year. So they did this as a district that is committed, as we just discussed, to culturally relevant practices, to a continued focus on early literacy, to our multi-tiered system of supports for our kids, for efforts on school climate, and for our efforts on equity learning. Again, these were the data that drove our planning into this school year and our active parts of what we are doing. Since we received the data, we've completed training of all of our educators on Beyond Diversity. We've focused on culturally relevant teaching practices. We've explored new ways to intervene and assess on literacy at early grades. We've asked our teachers to make specific MTSS plans for students who are below the 25th percentile in performance. And we have focused our principals on mid-year data reviews. In addition, our work on Black student success is focused in 3 schools working on data review and continuous improvement, which is all part of how we use these data. The data information as such are a clearing call to all District 65 educators to focus our work on improving outcomes, and especially outcomes for kids of color and those from historically and marginalized backgrounds. I'm most concerned about the results for Black and Latinx students at and below the 25th percentile and the persistent opportunity gaps that exist. I'm also concerned about the data on the children entering our pre-K and kindergartners not ready to learn, something that Evanston Cradle to Career has embraced as a community goal. There is some promising growth in math, particularly in the percentage of students making expected gains for all students and especially for Black students. And we did see some decreases for students at and below the 25th percentile compared to last year. Kylie will present the report, and my colleagues will be available to discuss how we're moving forward on the range of activities within our school improvement planning and within our goal setting to address some of the concerns that you'll raise. So thank you.
Great. Thank you, Dr. Gorn, for that wonderful introduction. I would like to start by thanking the members of the board for all of their great questions related to the way we use data in the district, and also thank the members of the public for engaging and asking critical questions about this data. As Dr. Gorn mentioned, a lot of this data has been presented in other places, This kind of brings it all together in a one-stop shop related to strictly assessment data. We will start by first grounding some of our review in some high-level principles around leveraging data for analysis in an equity framework. So first and foremost, I think it's really important that we acknowledge that data in education has traditionally been used in ways that are not supportive of moving the needle on outcomes that matter, in ways that normalize achievement and opportunity gaps. In recognition of this, we've tried to provide data in a lot of different ways to kind of get at some of those dynamics. I think that, even as we continue to do this work, there are ways to improve how we do that. And certainly our schools are engaging in data analysis related to supporting different groups of students in really rigorous and robust ways. Additionally, I would say it's important for us to recognize that aggregate data on test scores is only showing one facet of student performance, and it's a facet that may not necessarily encapsulate all of the knowledge and the skills and the strengths that our students possess. So we have to recognize that that's a significant limitation in what we can glean from these charts and tables. Additionally, I think it's really important that we do not become complacent in the fact that while on average we may be outperforming state or other districts who are kind of comparative peers, we don't let that be sufficient for us. We continue to drive ourselves forward. We continue to ask ourselves, how can we grow and develop outcomes for all students? We do not want to become complacent in accepting the fact that being above average for the state is sufficient, because it's not. And it doesn't, it doesn't allow us to really meet the needs of our community if we rest on those things. I think it's also really important that we acknowledge the fact that as a smaller school district, we have limitations in what we can do in representing a lot of the members of our community. It's a very diverse community. Unfortunately, there are limitations in terms of what we can do with the data that we have. There are safeguards that we have to make sure are met for protecting student privacy. That's one of our most critical things that we do as a school district, is safeguard the information and the performance information of individual students. So there are structural, barriers in terms of how deeply we can do some of the levels of analysis in a public venue like this. I will say, I know that our schools are digging deep. They go really deep in this data, and they're using it in their school teams to make sure they're meeting the needs of every child in that building. So while we may not necessarily get into the needs of our students whose gender identity is non-binary, or our students of Pacific Islander and Native American descent, we know that our colleagues in the schools are looking at every child who they're serving in their buildings and making sure that they're meeting their individual needs. As we all are aware, equity remains an urgent priority, top priority for our school district. This is something that we have seen in other data reports, and it continues to drive, as Dr. Gorin mentioned, the school planning efforts and school improvement efforts happening in our schools. The fact that we see opportunity gaps persisting between students of color and white students, between low-income students and high-income students, and for students with IEPs continue to be signals for us around the work that we need to continue to do. I would also say, we've been using this district data in planning. We've been using it in thinking through some of the instructional strategies, some of the school improvement strategies school leaders are utilizing, thinking about relation to culturally relevant pedagogy, our early literacy work, and making sure that we're looking at traditionally underserved student groups in all aspects of our work. One of the highlights in this report that I think is really important for us to think about and talk about as a community is the early elementary outcomes data. So we have seen some positive things here, but also some things that give us cause for doubling down on our efforts to support students. So, for example, when we look at the data, we see that Latinx students have seen decreases in the opportunity gap. It's by a small percent, 1%. I think that could be, it could be beginning of a trend, but it could also just be a blip in the data. We have to have more longitudinal data and see more years of data over time to really feel like that's progress. We do continue to see differences for students based on their entering levels of kindergarten readiness, and we're going to go into that data in a little bit in a more deep way. And these are outcomes that are very critically important because they do persist over time. And so addressing these needs as soon as possible and really focusing on supporting students at the early stages has a lot of implications for the grades later on. Here we see that there is an overall downward trend in the early literacy skills of the incoming students. So while a majority of students are meeting kindergarten readiness standards, we do see a decline, multiple years of decline here, 2 years. And last year when we shared this data, we did see this decline, and the downward trend continues. And when we look at our DRA data, we do see that among students who show proficiency, we see that gap, and it persists through third grade. So it's really critically important that we continue to assess this and look at the things that we're doing instructionally and the things that we're doing in terms of community supports to make sure that we are responding to what the data is telling us. You'll also notice an increase in the number of students who demonstrate a specific need. That is the students who are performing in the bottom 20th percentile. So not only do we have more kids coming in not kindergarten ready, but we also have more kids coming in who have, a substantial area of need. At the same time, we see a slight decline in the number of students who are coming in with advanced competency, which is mastering 2 skills or more. So all of this, is something that when we disaggregate the data, we can also see that those impacts are really happening across almost every subgroup. This is not an issue with a particular group of students. This is not confined to one kind of aspect of the work that we're doing. This is really a universal challenge that we see across all of our students. I will say that our Latinx students are sort of bucking this trend. So the percent of Latinx students meeting kindergarten readiness is currently at 35.4%, which is up from 28.5% last year. Obviously, this is still not satisfactory, but we should explore this further so that we could understand the drivers of this improvement and really continue to build on that. So while we see drops in everything else, if we're seeing some, something promising, we should really get into that and understand that better so that we can expand that. When we start to look at our MAP data, we see that there is a flat or declining trend. I say flat or declining because it's really difficult to tell if this is a declining trend or if this is sort of marginal change in kind of a fluctuation in the data. So we don't know necessarily if this is something significant, but definitely kind of leveling out of college readiness benchmark attainment. This occurred both for reading and for math. And when we look at the number of students making expected gains, we're seeing that more students are making expected gains. So performance in and of itself and ability to meet the college readiness is declining, but students are growing. But the rate at which they're growing is not sufficient to get them up to a level of proficiency. And And when we disaggregate the data, we see that almost all racial groups saw an increase in students making expected gains. So again, this is something that's really informative for us in terms of how students are growing and where students are growing, so that we can understand what's happening. This happened in math, and I would say particularly, for Black, Asian, and Latinx students, this is really encouraging. But again, we have to understand that even though there are gains in the growth are not at a scale sufficient enough to close the opportunity gaps that we see. So bringing students up to proficiency takes a much more significant amount of growth than what is occurring. One of the other things that we look at when we're looking at the MAP data is kind of how many students are currently in the bottom quartile, just to make sure everybody is clear. The bottom quartile in a normal distribution would be 25% of students. What we see here is that in math, 16% of students are in the bottom quartile, and in reading, 15.6% of students are in the bottom quartile. So compared to last year, this is fewer students who are in the bottom quartile, and there's progress, but still, when we disaggregate this data, we see that students that are in the bottom quartile are more likely to be students with IEPs, they're more likely to be students who are Black, and they're more likely to be students who qualify for free and reduced lunch. And that cuts across both reading and in math. When we look at the overall performance in PARCC, and we're not going to go into detail in the PARCC data, although I appreciate that that is probably something that we should talk about, and that is something that schools are doing as they're preparing, especially the schools who are digging into their data. They're trying to unpack the PARCC data in deeper ways to really get at what are some strategies that can be put in place to support the needs of students. In terms of our overall performance, we are performing, as I mentioned earlier, above the state averages in both language arts and in math. However, we have to remember that for subgroup performance, we do see those opportunity gaps, and those are areas of growth, both for the district and for our schools. I will conclude by saying that we continue to outperform the state and national averages. Our MAP performance is consistently above the 50th percentile, but again, that is insufficient in terms of how we meet the needs of all of the students in our buildings. We could have, hours and hours of discussion about this report because of its length and the number of kind of detailed data points that we could get into, but I just wanted to cover some of the very high-level key takeaways in the meeting tonight. And I'm really excited to talk with you all about your questions and to hear your perspectives. Thank you.
Thank you. Questions from the board?
So thank you so much for, again, your work on the report. And as Dr. Gore said, again, these are results that we've seen before in different reports in regards to updates to the community on where we're at, right? One of my questions is, again, would it be possible at some point in the next time report to include some data from pre-K? And again, I appreciate some, the Teaching Strategies Gold, which is an assessment that's used in pre-K classrooms to measure cognitive as well as fine motor, gross motor, and social emotional skills. And knowing that the research is really clear on how, again, those early years are the most important years in regards to brain development. I mean, I really think, again, it'll be hard to align to what we, to our MAP scores and ISIL. But again, I think it's something that's important that we as a community should know about and see how children are doing, at least in that particular assessment, which is an observational assessment. And again, it seems to be comprehensive and tries to measure the whole child.
Yeah, thank you. I think that's an important source of information. I know that our teachers are using the Teaching Strategies Gold information to help think about how they're working with students on developing those skill sets that are essential for, being prepared, being ready, building those kind of early numeracy, early literacy skills that we all know, both as parents, but also as educators, are essential for long-term student development and building that foundation. I think that there are opportunities for us to talk with our early childhood program leaders and educators about supports that they would like to see in order to be able to use that data and work with it better. Because even though it's a great, rich data set, it can be really cumbersome for people to work with because it has so much rich detail that is very individualized. And so pulling it back from an individual student and trying to see patterns in a classroom and that is a labor of love with the Teaching Strategies Gold data. And so I think that, that would be an important place for us to double down and do some intentional work and build on the work that already exists, and then think about how to scale that up in ways that make sense for kind of a more community-oriented report. I don't know if colleagues want to add to that, but I think that that's an important place to start, is really what can we put in place to help the teachers and the school leaders to really dig into that data and make it even more valuable than it is.
Absolutely, and I think again, having that data, not just for community members, and again, having had my kiddos go through preschool, I really appreciated that individual assessment, right, and knowing my child's individual strengths and areas for improvement, right. It really pinpointed all of those aspects, and again, in a holistic level. So if we could pick maybe a couple of things that can kind of, a couple of the measurements from Teaching Strategies Gold, to not only share with parents, but also between kindergarten teachers and our preschool programs in order to help plan and strategize on how to, again, bring out the best cognitive as well as social emotional outcomes for our kiddos once they transition from pre-K to our K-12 system.
Just a general comment. I'm on board, and yet as we go through the evening of comments, we'll have a lot of other things to think about, and we're going to have to think about sort of prioritizing, as we always do. We're committed to transparency. We're committed to putting the data out that can actually drive performance. A labor of love when we have 0.8 FTE who actually are doing the analysis. We're going to have to make some important choices to drive and accelerate achievement. And so just that in the context of all the requests, I think we're going to have to prioritize.
Yes, thank you. That's so true. There's a unlimited level of curiosity and inquiry that we can have, but we do have finite resources and manpower. And so, in making those prioritizations, really trying to think through what are the ways that we can best equip, like our teachers and our school leaders, to be able to use the data in ways that facilitate student learning, I think is really critically important as a North Star for allocating our incredibly finite data analysis resources.
So I largely agree with that, and I feel like this is something that we've been talking a lot about over the last couple of years, is thinking about what our priorities are and reorganizing them if necessary. I asked last year at this time for some disaggregation of data, so I was disappointed, not necessarily in anyone in particular. I know that you're new to your role, but I was disappointed that we were not able to get the disaggregation of our IEP data and our English language learner data. And I also understand the challenge with sample sizes in terms of being able to report that some things may say information is not available, but I think as nod to the existence of our non-binary population, that it's important to consider not having binary listings for gender, while also saying that we are an institution that values transgender and non-binary and gender non-conforming identities. So in some ways, I feel a bit like we're talking in circles. And I feel like perhaps I'm not being heard or not being understood. And so that's a little frustrating. I think that it would be very useful to have that disaggregated data for our students with IEPs and our English language learners, because we have racially disaggregated data for our other markers in our achievement report. And if we're comparing apples to apples, if we're having a public discourse about our progress towards our strategic plan goals, and we want to look at how our students are doing through the lens of racial equity, it's really difficult to do that if we are not looking at the intersections of racial equity, which includes perhaps a child's racial identity and a child's IEP status, a child's racial identity and their free and reduced lunch status, their racial identity and their English language learner status, or even their racial identity and their gender identity. Those intersections communicate to us the state of our progress as well. And it indicates to us, I think it should inform the equity lens with which we're all having discussions about our work and about policy. So I understand the trade-off, and I'm not suggesting that that's not a very real challenge. I think what I'm suggesting is that we've had at least a year to think about how to negotiate that challenge, and we haven't here. And so I was disappointed that we weren't able to do that with this report. When I asked in the summer, when we talked about some of these numbers in August, I was told, well, we're going to be able to do that in the winter. And here we are in the winter, and we still haven't. So that's something that is important for me, for us to figure out how to look at those intersections. And I think that it also speaks to some of the questions and concerns we heard from the director of CASE. I think if we can get some of that intersectional data, that'll help a lot of folks, including us at the board table.
Thank you for sharing that perspective. I do appreciate it. I know that I'm new to the district, and so, unfortunately, I don't have the wonderful benefit of all of the back historical knowledge. I will say that in my experience working with data and education data, it is hard to do public reporting when you are adding multiple factors about students and really be certain that you are not unintentionally violating student privacy by having so many factors that you could kind of, Sherlock Holmes out the data and really figure out, oh, at this school it's this, and it really becomes a lot less informative. I know that our schools are doing the sort of data work you describe, looking at students in a holistic way and looking at the multiple factors, because they can look at the data in that deep way without worrying about, public reporting and protecting and securing student confidentiality in a public space. And they're thinking about how those factors interconnect. And I know that my colleagues and I are thinking about data in those ways. I know that may feel unsatisfactory because it's unseen work, because it's not conducted in the public space. But if it helps at all, people are investigating it in that way. I think that, disaggregating data is really invaluable for us as a district to think about the overall patterns and the trends that we see. I think that there's a lot of evolving knowledge about how to disaggregate data in ways that are oriented around not demoralizing the gains of different groups. And so really thinking about what the movements around data use and data for social justice and a lot of these kind of movements in the research and data evidence use spaces around how do you look at that in ways that don't normalize gaps, I think is still evolving, and it's still something that we need to pay attention to. I don't know if others have ideas they want to share, but I think that's really important work. I think we should continue to discuss it and figure out ways in which to do that. I definitely think that the aspects about looking at English language learners is critically important. Thinking about our students with disabilities is critically important. And we have to always balance that to make sure that in the public space.
And where we can make a commitment, I'll make the commitment that Kylie and I will work on this and work on being explicit about what we can do and what we can't do as it relates to, I mean, a lot of what you're suggesting, Kylie, is that as the numbers go down, we run the risk of violating federal data laws. So, but I appreciate your push, Anya, and so I think what our response needs to be, my response needs to be, is again to be very explicit about what we can and what we can't do, and where we can, we should.
And I understand that at a school level, like that gets pretty granular, but I don't understand why at a district level, how it would get so granular that anyone would be able to identify a particular student unless someone knew every student in the district and then looked at that and said, I know the one student, and I can't imagine that we have one racially disaggregated student with an IEP, or that we have one racially disaggregated student who's an English language learner.
Well, when it comes,
unless we get into maybe every single language that is spoken in the district, right? Then we might find that we have one person who speaks Wolof. But I'm just not understanding why if we reported information at the district level and disaggregated it in that way, how that would risk revealing an individual. And I'm not a data expert. I would not put myself forward as that, but I'm having a hard time understanding that challenge. But I think that it's worthy of more time and discussion.
And just to echo that call, I know that the request for disaggregation of IEP data it's been something that has been requested by this board and previous iterations of this board before. I think we know when we look at data over years, we know that we have gaps based on race, based on IEP, and based on English learner status. We know that those are three of our most vulnerable and underserved groups. To be able to take ELL and IEP and understand how race plays into those gaps, and I think that is important for us as we are advancing the equity work to know. And again, at a district level, I'm not talking about at school levels at all, but at a district level, because we talk sometimes about it we have the racial equity work and then we have work to help lift up IEP students as though they're separate things, when they're not necessarily separate things. But I don't think we can fully tell that story or explain that well when we don't disaggregate the data. So I think certainly, at least with IEP data, I don't think that's a new request. So I would hope that we can see that. And I do think it's important to the extent with English learners that we can have that. And again, if there, I saw in places in the report where, for example, Pacific Islander, Native Hawaiian, where we don't have enough students, we don't report on that. So I think that we can have a similar, if there's any groups that can't be reported for whatever reason, and I would add that that's something that we can do for our non-gender, non-binary students, is to have that and just at least to make them visible, but show that we can't report the data on them. I think we can do something similar to that. And so at least have some high-level understanding of how those, how the intersectionality works with IEP and race and language learner status and race.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, high-level aggregate data.
For sure.
You know,
And I think that's all
obviously-
we've ever asked for as a board. It's never been anything more granular than that.
I would say that all students are general education students first, even those with IEPs.
That's
So
what I said
just
that
to
again.
add on what you said, all students are general education students first, even the kids with IEPs.
Right.
So we shouldn't just view them as that within the report, but
Right.
I guess this is a case of if you do what you've done, you're going to get what you've got, right? So that's this board's problem, ultimately. And I challenge the leadership group to tell us what's next, right? For me, it comes back to the vertical alignment. It's when we talk about all the different things that are going on in the professional learning, do we have an associated outcome that we're hoping to influence with those things? What is Beyond Diversity supposed to give us within the outcome indicators? Because while there's a whole bunch of cultural pieces to it about our district and community and kids being seen and taken care of, there's also an academic readiness component that I'm sure is aligned to it. And I don't know if that means we have to rewrite components of the report card to say, like, here are the things we're doing and here's how it's related to what we're hoping to see. But again, if we don't say what things are for, then negativity fills the ambiguity. It fills that void. And if I'm a teacher and I'm charged with raising kids to be successful in a myriad of ways, right? Park isn't the benchmark that I go for. It's far away from what I do. So, we don't talk about here what the tiered level of support looks like, so that do I know who my kids are that are not making the grade? Like, we've talked about work plans and all that, but it's all still very high level, and to the point of acknowledging kids in the report, acknowledging that those things exist doesn't mean that we have to go into it in detail, but the way that the report comes out, similar to previous ones, it's telling us what we already knew. And that's very frustrating, because I can probably tell you what next year's report is going to say, plus or minus some data points. And so, the time spent into this wonderful report, I would love to know how it could be better utilized in terms of research, right? Which schools of ours have systems in place to support students of color? How do we multiply that effort? Which schools are knocking it out of the park with students with IEPs or certain kinds of eligibilities? How do we multiply that effort? We talk about leadership and growth. That's what I want to hear from the leadership group. Again, at another point, not tonight, but that's what's missing, is that explicit, this is what our goal is. And it's okay if we don't meet the goal as long as we have one. I feel like not having one is a lot more frustrating than having one that's not met. Albeit we have a numeric goal that is written. But yeah, that is my only thought.
So I appreciate your comments in a couple ways, but primarily as Kylie has transitioned on, one of the questions I posed was, how could we do this report differently? How can we remain transparent for the community? We're not going to shy away from data and putting the information out. How do we remain transparent for our educators that we work with, because these are the data that represent the children and their outcomes. But it does beg an interesting question of framing and reframing the report, and in a way, and I think Kylie's appropriate pushback to her new boss was, I'm just here for a couple of weeks. Let me produce what we've produced, but let's actually take the feedback that we get and actually think about how we move forward. So again, transparency is still going to be there. Data and outcomes are still going to be there, and how we actually think about as we take the various questions at the macro level of the school district for accountability, and then how those data are usable and drivable at the principal level and the school improvement level and at the classroom level.
Right, but again, the questions that were sent out prior to this meeting, as we were all, diving into the report, they were 100% predictable. They were 100% predictable. And to me, although Kylie's new, that's a failure of the leadership team who didn't communicate expectations that were presented prior in the transition to be incorporated into this step. And I don't know where that communication ball got dropped, but that's incredibly frustrating. Again, I don't know other words to put into it, but these aren't new requests. And if they can't be met, all we have to hear is, this is why it can't be met. It's unreasonable, it's asinine, I don't have the time, or it's impossible because we don't have it. All acceptable responses, but if you don't know that the question is there, you're already set up to have this dialogue, right, in a public forum, which sucks. And that's unfair. So I just think, again, everybody else was already at the table for those conversations the past 2 times, at least that I've been here. So I would say that the team has to regroup and figure out, how do we not have a predictable conversation the next time?
I appreciate this push. I think it's really interesting to think about how we can reconfigure this report in ways that provide better information. I think what I hear, though, in your questions is that a broad openness to, well, if it's not this, if this isn't going to make an impact, what is? And so, I guess I would want to make sure, that the goal of this report is really one of improvement versus one of, having a compendium, having a continued kind of traditional format of just having this report. There's value to that also, if that's the purpose of this report. And so, I think that we should have another conversation about what really is the goal of this work.
Can we have that conversation right now instead of another conversation? I think one of the questions I have may answer a bit of that, which is, I asked via email as well about, and I believe Candace asked this via email, about cohort analysis. If we are looking at levels or rates or levels of improvement, it would be, I think, useful to not look at these snapshots of year to year, but to actually see how cohorts of students are progressing. And I personally would love it, even if it was an aggregate, right? If we're seeing how, if cohorts are making progress in closing the gap, that is, I believe, how we would be able to see if learning is being accelerated with particular disaggregated groups.
And I think if I can just interrupt for a second to say, particular, for example, with something like the K-3 literacy framework, which, what year are we now in implementation of that? So to have that cohort data of DRA results and to be able to then make an analysis of what does that tell us about the implementation of the K-3 literacy framework, I think would be a useful way to use information.
Yeah, I think when folks look at the analysis now, it's like, oh, well, we're dropping. Are we dropping, or is there a cohort that is struggling, right? Are students across the board in that disaggregated group struggling, or is there a particular cohort that's struggling? And I don't think that we can answer those questions right now as a governance body, and then also as a community for folks who are paying attention to this report. And so I think finding a way to have some kind of cohort analysis. Also, when we're looking at the strategic plan goal, looking at how cohorts have performed since the strategic plan was implemented, I think would be useful to see to ask ourselves some questions about if new instructional strategies that have been implemented are having an impact. So that's something that's been difficult for me in looking at this data, is not having the cohorts in addition to that disaggregated data. And then for early childhood kindergarten readiness, I feel like a data point that we're missing that we may have the information from a couple of years ago is how kindergarten ready are students based on what early childhood experience they've had. And I understand not wanting to list names of institutions and rank them, but even if we anonymously noted any trends in terms of where students attended or where they had their early childhood experience and what their outcomes are for kindergarten readiness.
Or what type of early childhood experience it was,
Yes.
maybe. That's a more anonymous way to look at it.
Yeah, I feel like that is telling information that at the very least could be useful internally, so that maybe there's some learning that we can do within our community if we're able to know that information. And so I'm curious about if we have it and if there's a way that that is being used internally, and if there's a way that we can talk about it publicly while also maintaining anonymity for those institutions, and what that tells us about closing the opportunity gap, because this opportunity gap is happening early. It's happening oftentimes before our families start kindergarten. So we need to think about what families are accessing, what opportunities that's leading to their children feeling better prepared for our kindergarten classrooms. And I think that that's something that we should know and talk about and think about.
Yeah. I think there's a lot in there, because there were multiple great suggestions and ideas discussed. I think cohort analysis, and we had some of this dialogue in email, I think it's really valuable, and we're doing some of that with other projects. I think that to do that work in lieu of this work, because it is about making priorities, we could definitely explore and examine that. We couldn't do every cohort in the district over time, right? But we could provide some information that would be potentially valuable and would help us address some of those questions. I think the questions around, bringing in data from other sources and other places, to me is a larger question. We have to wonder about, the quality of the data, the fidelity with which it's been collected, to make sure that it's data that you can compare from site to site or place to place, to make sure that any conclusions that you're drawing on the basis of the data are valid and reliable and warranted. So we'd have to really understand the quality of data.
Well,
from
it would be our ISIL data, so the data would be our data.
I don't think she was talking about bringing in other data.
Comparing that to early childhood institution attended, which would be collected from parents reporting.
I misunderstood.
And I think maybe what we can do, because where people attend is self-reported, and sometimes there are questions about which institutions and how many institutions they've attended. But I think, what we have right now, and I appreciate it, is I think we've heard a couple different things, which is that there's possibly some permission to do this report differently. And that there are some very specific questions or possible recommendations, and it might just be that we need to then dig into these and others to say, I hear you saying, how can we get more value out of this report to drive change? And we think these are places where there's value. And so maybe it's considering that and the possibility of reformatting that, and then it's something that we could take some of this conversation offline to figure out how it can be shifted. Right.
I just want to add to that too. It's not just how can we get value. I know that our community also looks at this.
I was using a
So
very
how can
large collective
we
on that one. Because I think similarly, there's, in some cases with this data, this is data that isn't always actionable for us in some cases either. Right. So it creates some possibilities.
Yeah, I think
Thank you.
I think the we is a broad we. You as the governing board, we as senior administration, we as a community members, and then I also think our educators too. I mean, it's again, I'm not shying away at all from transparency. On the other side, I'm not sure this is reading of many of our colleagues in our buildings. And so then the question is, how do we drive change? How do we, it's what Stacy said, how do we take the information that's usable and drivable fast?
Right. I also
I appreciate
my assumption, my presumption is after X number of years, 4 years of the data looking the way it has, my guess is there's some victories that you're seeing, which is why we're staying the course. And I absolutely would want you to have the permission to find a way to incorporate those into this report so that we, like, there might be victories in other places that are precursors to in this data. Barring you getting into a mixed methods research project.
No, I want to get into a mixed methods research project.
No, but you're the only one.
I know.
And
I think that's really important. And again, I'm assuming that there's wins out there that are worth celebrating, and that would be welcome.
And let me recommend a win. A win would be, for instance, for English learners, right? So so for kids who are English learners are given access to take the opportunity to be able to take the MAP test in math and Spanish, right? And going back to the Hispanic Student Achievement Report that we had a couple of years ago, again, we saw that again, children who took it in their own language, again, this is a culturally responsive practice, blew it out of the water. I mean, they were incredible. And so that's a win there. And I think that's something that can be incorporated into this. And to also think about the challenge for English learners, right? You're doing two things. You're as an English learner, you're learning another language. At the same time, you have to learn most of your content in English. So again, given some of the growth here that I see with Latinx students, I mean, that to me is, we need to double that because again, they're doing double the work because they're learning a new language. At the same time, they have to learn academic and content. So again, that's a win that we can incorporate in there, right? And I saw we tried to incorporate it here, which was good. But again, and then also thinking about how that specific aspect of being an English learner or somebody with an IEP impacts the way somebody performs. Again, those kids are doing double the work to be where they need to be. And we're still not, again, there's still this gap. But again, where are the wins there? And again, where can we see the wins and what's working to get them to the growth? And I think the new National Education Law, ESSA, allows us to really try to look more at growth. And as a state, we're trying to measure growth from school districts, student growth, as opposed to kind of just the outcomes, right? So the outcomes have always been the same. I mean, you can go across the country, and can somebody tell me a school district that has actually closed the gap? It'd be very hard to find, right? Because what you see, and what I keep seeing in these graphs is that, again, there continues to be like this 20 to 30% consistent gap between white students and everybody else. And to me, that tells me something, that one, we're probably using the wrong measurement, because I know that children are more than a score. And as a teacher, I'd seen my kids throughout the year grow until they got to that, the standardized testing time. And they got tested on things that weren't part of the curriculum, and they failed miserably. And that destroyed their curiosity. So to me, I mean, again, we really need to, one, celebrate the victories with what we're being required by law to report through testing, standardized testing, but at the same time, also look at expanding the way we measure children's success, right? And so access scores for English learners, for instance, are kids doing really well in Spanish? How well are they progressing in learning English? And since we have a dual language program, can we measure how well they're doing in Spanish? Because again, they're supposed to be learning two languages, which again will benefit them at the end of their school careers in the job market. So what can we do to really expand the way we look at how children achieve? Because we're going to continue to sit here and continue to hear protests and complaints from the community. Because we're fixated on these test scores, but we're not seeing the larger picture and we're not seeing the whole child. And that to me is frustrating. I'm tired of seeing these reports. Again, still being a licensed educator, still working in education at the state level, and knowing that children grow. in classrooms. They're always growing. And it's just frustrating to continue to see this and to continue to have these same conversations, because we continue to fixate on just a couple of numbers, a couple of pieces of data, when in reality we know that children are growing. And what they really need is that now that we have this data, we really need to figure out, okay, so then what supports can we use to target the children's needs in order to help them meet high standards and that we have for them to achieve in our community, right? So to me, that's kind of what I'd like to see in our report is, again, what are we doing to expand the way we see how we see children succeed and achieve relative to what they bring to our community, right? So they may be an EL learner, they may be somebody with IEP who has autism, right? Can we get snapshots of, okay, so in this school we see that children with IEPs are in the 20th percentile. So this particular school is doing this in order to address this concern, right? And how can we emulate that across the district? Because it's really frustrating to me to see the same reports over and over again. We have over 15 years of MAP data that show the same thing. And there have been some, it's risen, but the gap has always been there. The gap has always been there. So what do we do to, maybe the measuring instruments are wrong. Maybe MAP is wrong. Maybe we need to consider another form of measurement. I know we're doing a step assessment pilot in a couple of schools. So, I'd be interested to see if maybe that's another option. And then, I read in the roundtable, I wasn't part of the conversation, but the high school, the 202, districts 202 and 65 meeting where they were discussing our joint literacy goals, and we still haven't been able to figure out a way to align our data to meet literacy goals, to make sure that kids can read by the time they get to the high school. So then that to me is frustrating. That we can't, and again, they're suggesting that we use STAR, but we insist on using MAP, and MAP continues to show us that there continues to be a gap. So then I'm ready to start STEP. Like, can we pilot STAR? Let's pilot STAR and see what that like, and then we can maybe at least try to align something. I don't know. It just frustrates me to be here. Again, I've only been here 2 years. But as an educator for 13 years, it just frustrates me to see how we continue to misrepresent kids and the way they develop. Because all children grow, all children have this potential. And if we just give them the right supports, and the algebra detracking shows us this, is that again, if you offer children, you have high expectations for them, and you give them the supports, they're going to get there. And, that's just.
So I think given the hour and wanting to,
I do have one thing I wanted to say, because I feel like we've been talking an awful lot about the report for the sake of the report, but I feel like we haven't really talked at all about some of the really important information that came out of it. And one thing in particular is I don't really understand what we're doing as a district to affect kindergarten readiness and what we're doing to improve that outcome for children.
So if I can speak to that a little bit. So the ISIL data is how we measure literacy kindergarten readiness. And the ISIL assessment is given in the first 5 weeks of school when students arrive in kindergarten. So there are really two lanes of the work. Our primary work is to embrace every student that walks in the door and really dig into our teaching and learning and our interventions and our supports to make sure that we are embracing and understanding and accelerating every learner that enters into the district. And so that is the work that we've really been challenging ourselves with in the literacy framework over the last 3 years in kindergarten through third grade. And so we've really tried to advance work on phonics and language workshop and reading workshop, and this year in K1 it's the intersection. We also have realized that we've also seen in some of our data that we still are seeing some gaps in the phonics work, so we are piloting a specific phonics program this spring to possibly do a replacement with one of our curricular programs to further strengthen the work there. So the large majority of the work for us is from when we receive each student and begin to understand and know them as individuals and learners going forward. Then we also clearly have other lanes of work, which is in JEH. And Sharon Sprague has really been digging in this year with the students in the 3 to 5 year old section was recently in a professional learning session with them where they were diving into the Teaching Strategies Goal data. And they did a walk that took a look at all the different domains of Teaching Strategies Goal data and the comparative data from last year to this year. And we're noting hypotheses on charts to think about the trends that they could go back to their SIT team. And then collaborative teams with the teachers and teaching assistants sat and really broke down the academic data to see where students were as to whether they were in the grade level, in the age level band above or below, and identifying strategies for working with kids to accelerate some of that to find ways to accelerate the learning for those students. And so there's very concrete work that the SIT team at JEH under Sharon's leadership is really taking on to better understand the academic processes in balance with the social emotional learning in that space. The third lane of this work is the work that we do within the community through Cradle to Career. And we work with the Literacy on Track team, a lot underneath the guidance of Diane Lacroix. And Elizabeth and I are both members on that team. And Jeremy referenced the information that was put out recently by that team in order to provide activities to families on how to help students to have a strong start to kindergarten. And that group has put out that brochure. We did originally the educator standards, and the educator standards are also on the website with the parent brochure. And we also have done the educator summit in the kind of winter to spring. It's like late spring probably at this point, but where we bring together educators from our early childhood centers with some of our kindergarten educators and engage in an evening of learning and collaboration. The last piece of that work is that we've been doing some classroom swaps where kindergarten educators have been going into pre-kindergarten settings and pre-kindergarten teachers have been coming into kindergarten settings and having an opportunity to see the kind of learning experiences and learn from each other in those spaces. And I think that's created some very good conversation about some of the kind of differing experiences and the best way to support transition of students between those environments.
Thank you.
So I think we could probably go on for quite some time, but I think, the larger takeaways that Stacy wrapped up or noted before are, clearly we need to rethink this report and what it's going to look like next year. I think, well, we can get into details and we should talk more specifics. I think the overarching theme that I've heard tonight and that I frankly have heard for a number of years is how do we get data reported to us in a way that we can really analyze programs that we're implementing, like what I noted before with K through 3, the literacy framework, the culturally responsive pedagogy that we were talking about earlier. Like how can we look at the initiatives and programs that we have invested significant time and effort in? How can we look at the data in a way that will help us analyze how we're doing on those and if those are actually making progress towards the goals that we've stated? I think we have similarly made a significant investment of time and resources into social and emotional learning, and yet we have nowhere in this report any data around how we are doing on that work. I know that's not as easy to just say, oh, we'll report it this way because we don't have those measures. So I think it's important to discuss what it would take to get those types of measures. And then how can it's not that those measures in lieu of the academic measures, it's the combination of those and what can we learn and how can we use the social emotional learning that we are promoting to then move the needle on academic data. And so I think those are all, things that we need to discuss more and will discuss more.
Well, and I welcome that. And then what's going through my mind right now is as we've done the climate teams and we've phased them in over time so that we can do it within our capacity, because I don't want to make excuses. We want to get the work done that really drives the stimulating conversation and debate so we move forward. So what's the... Kylie and I and the team will look at what's the right way to move forward in ways that get to the questions that you're asking us to get to, and that we can phase in on time depending on our capacity. we'll take that on.
All right, thank you very much. We will move the building safety discussion to our next meeting. We have a policy committee meeting next week. It will be on Tuesday, February 5th, so a different day of the week than normal. And we'll also be starting that meeting, the public meeting, at 7 p.m. Rather than 6 p.m., which is our usual start time for policy meetings. But this one will start next week, Tuesday, February 5th at 7 p.m. Other than that, with no further business to come before the board, I adjourn this meeting at 10:06 p.m.